Good evening. Welcome to the August 22nd Village Board meeting. This special session is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Who is acting clerk this evening?
Yes, thank you very much. I'll take the roll. Trustee Herrera.
Present.
Trustee Bazemore.
Present.
Trustee Codman.
Present.
And Mayor Garrity.
Present.
Are there any announcements that you wish to make this evening?
Why don't we just move right through the
Resolution?
resolution and then we'll get to the work session.
Very
Got a
good.
pretty heavy evening ahead.
Resolution A, call for opening a public hearing, consideration of the Emergency Tenant Protection Act as applied to qualifying rental properties in the Village of Ossining. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining hereby calls for the opening of a public hearing to take place at the Birdsall-Fagan Police Court Facility, 86-88 Spring Street in Ossining on September 5, 2018, at 7:30 p.m. or as soon thereafter as the matter may be heard, to provide an opportunity for public comment as to whether the protections of the Emergency Tenant Protection Act should be applied to qualifying multifamily rental properties in the Village of Ossining. Under consideration are multifamily rental properties of 6 or more units, which were completed prior to January 1, 1974. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Comments on the board?
Sure,
All right. Okay.
I'll make a statement. The vacancy study has been completed, and we have made that public. And given the results of the study, I see no reason to delay any public comment related to this, and that is why myself and 2 of my fellow board members want to move forward and begin the public hearing process on the 5th of September.
Anyone else like to comment?
Fine.
I just want to clarify for folks that what we're voting on tonight is to have a public hearing, which will take place at the courthouse in 2 weeks, November 5th.
September
5th. Thank you. And that's an opportunity for people to come and speak. Any vote tonight is to vote for an opportunity for people to be heard and to share their opinions and to share their questions about ETPA. So some folks, if you know that I am not supportive of this, you may be surprised that I'm going to be voting for the public hearing. The public hearing is an opportunity for everyone to bring their questions to the public and their comments. Before that happens, next week we are having a special work session. It starts a little earlier than usual. It will be starting at 7 p.m. and it will be held at the community center. That meeting is going to be a presentation from the consultants who undertook the study. We would encourage anyone with questions that you want to be addressed during the presentation, please send them to us in advance, and as to the degree possible, we want this presentation to be as valuable as it can be. And then everyone will have as much information as we can provide up front for you to take in, think about, and then come to us on September 5th and tell us your comments, what you want us to be thinking about. So send any questions or comments that you have in advance of the presentation to a bunch of us sitting here at this table. You can do bot@villageofossining.org, dmcdonnell@villageofossining.org, and we will Debbie will relay those questions to the consultants in an effort to try and get as much information shared at the August 29th meeting. Again, that'll be starting at 7 o'clock, a little earlier than usual, and it will be at the community center. And the presentation will be provided by the consultants who undertook the study, and I believe we will have on hand Chuck Lesnick from DHCR, correct? Okay, so there will hopefully be a lot of information to be shared on the 29th, and I imagine there will be many people who will join us on September 5th to comment. So.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Do I have a motion to adjourn, to close the legislative session and to adjourn to work session?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. So with that, we'll be moving on to our very interesting work session. We'll have presentations tonight from a number of guests. So before the presentations begin, does anyone have any announcements to make for the community?
I do not. Thank
Anything
you.
to add to our calendar or make people aware of? All right, then we can just jump right into our 2017 audit. Is that going to be first up tonight?
Correct, that'll
All
be
right.
first. Yeah, so I would like to introduce the Tom Warren, our village treasurer, to come up and actually introduce the firm who conducted our audit. It's a happy moment for me because last year this time you were appointing me to this position. So thank you, Tom, for coming, and thank you all for appointing me to this position because I really, really enjoy it. So
Happy anniversary.
thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and members of the Board of Trustees. As was stated, the auditors are here tonight to talk about the results of the 2017 financial statement audit. So here's the partner from the firm, Brendan Kennedy, from BST and Company LLP.
Close enough. And I'd like to thank the mayor for saying there's interesting presentations because that doesn't happen often when people talk about audit results.
We usually like your report.
Okay.
So we're hoping to like it again.
We have a number of deliverables that were passed out in advance, but what I'd like to work off of today, which is going to get put up on the,
All right.
is this presentation right here. So we're going to work off the presentation, but with that said, I know we have questions or comments, and you're more than welcome to stop me as I'm going along, and I'm happy to address them as we proceed. I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet because I know you have a big meeting here tonight. So with that said, you flip past the table of contents or the cover page in the table of contents, and so a couple pages here. And you get to the scope of services. Do I need to click or are you clicking? Oh, how about that? I'll be damned. All right. Scope of services. So we audited your financial statements, which includes 5 opinion units, 3 major governmental funds, the government-wide which is the aggregation of everything, and the remaining non-major funds, which are referred to as the other aggregate information. We also do a federal single audit. You have 1 major program. That's your Section 8 program. This is consistent with the prior period. You did receive other federal awards, but they did not rise to the level of materiality that would require an audit. So with a federal single audit, there's both an audit of compliance and controls. And when we have a federal single audit and we spend more than $100,000 in state DOT money, we also do a state single audit. Very similar in nature to the federal single audit. This is just specific to your DOT federal programs. And finally, we have a report on compliance and internal control over financial reporting. It's often called the Yellow Book report. It's done in accordance with government auditing standards. Financial statements. Unmodified opinion for each opinion unit. An unmodified opinion is the highest level of opinion or form that we can give you that the financial statements are free of material error. An unmodified opinion is also known as a clean audit opinion. That's the opinion the board would want, and that's the opinion that we deemed appropriate for our audit. There's also an in relation to opinion on the supplementary information. So the basic financial statements include the MD&A, the actual statements, and the footnotes, and then there's a bunch of information included in the back of the document, supplementary information, and we've deemed that to be appropriate in the context of the financial statements. No recorded audit adjustments, no internal control deficiencies that we will report to you. This does not happen very often, so I think it's a testament to the processes and controls that you have here at the village that we can say those things. We did identify 1 enhancement to internal control, relatively minor as it relates to your purchase order process. That's included in a separate communication which is available to the board. On the single audit, as mentioned, our major program was the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher, which was about $3.36 million. I was very pleased. Last year was our first year, and I continue to be pleased with the condition of the records that your folks maintain. Internal controls over compliance were adequately designed and operating effectively, and you complied with the requirements, materially complied, and therefore received an unmodified opinion on your federal single audit. So far, nothing but good news. State DOT audit is a relatively non-complex audit. There was only $187,000. I believe it was only a couple of vouchers, and again, controls were in place, compliance was in place, and an unmodified opinion was issued. Areas of audit focus, a lot of these were relatively consistent with the prior period. One of the challenges that we all faced was the implementation of this Munis software, which is still in the works. Not all the modules, I believe, are up to date at this point. But we did also look at internal controls over financial reporting, in particular journal entries, cash reconciliations, obviously, payroll processing, your disbursements above, and then your significant accounting estimates, which are listed there. And finally, obviously, we did focus on your compliance with laws and regulations. As far as the federal single audit, here's just a list of some of the procedures that we did as part of the audit. I won't read them verbatim, but we did select 25 participants and made sure they complied. They were eligible to participate, and then all the documentation that's supposed to be accompanying those files was there. So again, no issues as it relates to your federal single audit. Again, state single audit, just in summary, no issues as it relates to that. We found the controls to be appropriate and all the documentation to be adequately supporting the balances. Just a quick financial analysis. You guys are in good shape. One of the metrics that I like to show people is your unrestricted fund balance as a percentage of total expenditures. You had a slight uptick this year compared to the prior year. You held the line on expenditures while benefiting from some increased revenues. And then just, one thought was whether or not to establish some legal reserves in accordance with general municipal law. That would simply be restricting funds and moving it from the unrestricted column to the restricted column. Sometimes OSC gets picky about how much unrestricted fund balance you have, but some would argue, how can you have too much in this day and age? So very positive news as it relates to your general fund. Water fund, as well as your other major operating fund, that appears to be financially stable as well. I mean, there was a slight decrease. I think that was attributed to the transfer of resources to the capital project fund. As everyone knows, there's a relatively significant project going underway, and some of those funds that we had accumulated over the period have been set aside for that capital project. In summary, that bottom point, water rates appear sufficient to cover operating and debt service related expenditures. I simply like to point that out. In the event that wasn't the case, it might be time to think about a water rate increase, but at this point in time, your water rates appear to be sufficiently covering those expenditures. Other funds, we had some new bans issued. So that was part of our audit procedures, making sure that that was properly accounted for. And we also had some significant capital project spending. I kind of broke it down by function here. As you can see, the biggest piece is home and community service. And a lot of that spending was water infrastructure related. You have two self-insured internal service funds. The workers' comp and your other appear to be adequately reserved. Those are functioning properly. The sewer fund appears to be in good shape. And this is consistent with the prior period. Your Section 8 housing fund is effectively break even, but it does require a small transfer from your general fund, I believe, just to break even. Not uncommon. On the horizon. So just wanted to bring this to your attention. And just to be clear, this accounting standard, which we'll be implementing for the 12/31/18 period, is going to impact the government-wide financial statements only. That's the full accrual statement. It's the aggregation of all of our activity. It will have no impact on your general fund. It will have no impact on your water fund. But it is kind of a doozy. GASB 75 replaces GASB 45. That deals with the accounting and reporting, of your other post-employment benefits. There's significant changes to the methodology. It removes the amortization period, so we're going to book the whole lump sum. This has been in the works for a while. This is not going to come as a surprise to the bond rating community, so I don't expect any adverse reactions. And just to be clear, this is not an Ossining issue. This is an everyone issue. Everyone is going to be adopting this accounting standard across the board, but it is going to have a significant impact on your net position when we adopt this next year. Just final communications, and then I'll leave it open for questions. Personnel were friendly, well organized, and knowledgeable. Any requests we made were adhered to. No one withheld any information or gave us any trouble while we were conducting our audit. The village appears to be in good financial health. Accounting policies were appropriate. No significant changes. We will have a significant change next year. No significant or unusual transactions. We did evaluate accounting estimates, including the possibility of management bias. We felt that the inputs and assumptions used to develop your estimates were appropriate. We did not identify any materially deficient processes, and obviously you comply with your federal laws and regulations materially, so we have unmodified opinions. No significant difficulties, and again, the finance department was cooperative and responsive, along with all the village personnel. So all in all, it was a very positive financial and federal single audit for us. And we appreciate all the cooperation, and it allows us to do our work and issue these reports here. So with that, those are my prepared remarks. If there's questions or comments, I'm happy to address them now.
You can visit anytime. Thank you for that really positive report, and thank you to Tom and everyone in your department for such admirable practices that we can get these glowing reports and tell the public what a bang-up job you're doing in maintaining everything, as well as everyone on the staff who was able to provide all the information that you asked for in such a helpful manner. Do my colleagues have any questions or comments? Please.
You referenced that the unrestricted fund balance made a suggestion that maybe some of that money may be allocated for a special purpose. Can you give me a sense of what percentage that you think would be appropriate? I mean, like you said, it seems kind of odd that we would be punished because we have too much money in our rainy day fund here.
Yeah. The comment is really stemming from comments that the state comptroller's office has made to various municipalities, and they're never going to tell you definitively what that number is. I've found that once you start creeping over 20% of your unrestricted fund balance, it might put you as they could make a comment, and that's just a comment. That's their opinion. It doesn't mean you need to do anything. They don't have the authority. But the whole theory is that you shouldn't be accumulating resources without having any specific purpose for them. It's just a theoretical point that they make occasionally. And what I can try and do is maybe even find you an example of where they've made that comment before. So I like to give my clients a heads up. And this is really just for the ones that are in good shape. There's some good places like Lake Placid is an example. They're in the 50s. And they don't care what OSC says. They're not going to change their fund balance. They're going to do what they want to do. But it's just a recommendation. There's various legal reserves you can set up. And it doesn't mean you can't use the money ever. It would just be set aside for a particular capital project or a particular, could be an employee benefit type reserve. But, you know, it's kind of, to answer your question, there's no Goldilocks zone. You're going to be criticized if you don't have enough. And apparently now you can be criticized if you have too much.
So as a follow-up to that, and you know, based on what you're seeing in terms of our expenditures and you know, well, in future consideration of the new FASB that's coming out, would you?
Yeah.
That's going to have an effect on our pension, right?
Well, that's a great point. I always point out to people that people that make the argument that we have perhaps too much unrestricted fund balance. Your governmental funds are on a modified accrual basis of accounting, which is kind of closer to the cash basis. When you think about things like your other post-employment benefits, and this is universal across the state of New York, that's a large unfunded defined benefit that we've offered our people, again, consistent across every municipality, and we're not permitted to fund that. You know, if there was a mechanism to fund that going forward, we could easily absorb any excess fund balance that someone may think we have into, you know, a trust for those kinds of benefits. So
we're not allowed to do that. Apparently.
No. There's legislation at the state level that's been stalled for a long time. Comptroller DiNapoli, I think, was proposing some option where, you know, he could manage the money on behalf of everyone, similarly to, you know, how the retirement system goes. We monitor it, but at this point, there's nothing active that I would point to. So you're right. You have significant unfunded liabilities just like everyone else. So how could you have too much money?
Thank you.
I'm just, well, I wrote down 3 things. So
Okay.
John hit 2 of them. FASB 7.5 and restricted versus unrestricted. So we're done. The other one is, Tom, the department. I mean, a big part of this is how smoothly, I guess, the audit went and that. So we're in good shape. You know, I always, around a month from now, start asking Tom about bonds and where we are. It's not really an auditing issue, but to me, it seems like everything's status quo. We had a similar report, I think, last time.
Yeah, very, very similar.
I think I'm not seeing changes. So the only third point would be, what's different?
In terms of our audit approach,
Not the approach, but do you see any major differences between last time? Because it seems like we're on track.
yeah,
We were in the
everything's
same
on track. The
position.
only difference I would say is you have this accounting system implementation that's been a bit of a pain in the butt. Accounting system implementations are tough. If you go to 5 different municipalities as to what the best software is, you're going to get 5 different answers.
Okay.
And when people ask me what software they would choose, I legitimately have no answer because there's no clear winner right now. Munis is a brand name. It's very popular. I can list 10 clients that have it. But, you know, just trying to get some of the reports that we need. Sometimes that, you know, may have took time, but we obviously got what we needed when we needed it. But that would be the only difference we saw was the, you know, the factors associated with that accounting system implementation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Of course. And I encourage you, if you have questions, obviously we meet once a year like this. If you have questions during the year, Tom has my contact information. It's included in the back. We're always happy to speak with the board. Remember, I work for you folks, so if you have questions during the year, we're happy to work with you and address those questions.
Thank you.
Trustee Herrera?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if there was a way for us to have like a 1-pager summary for a taxpayer. Just wanted to see our audit process and the findings, or I mean, I kind of in the last PowerPoint that kind of seemed to be it.
Yeah.
That, you know. So
Yeah. Let's see what we can do. I don't know if it would be something BST would draft, or if it would be something, you know, you would take from the results of all of our work. But I'm open to any suggestions. Auditors tend to throw compliments like manhole covers, so it was about as nice as I can be today.
No, and thank you.
We're usually here to tell you when you did things wrong, so.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
That's a good idea. Perhaps there's a way that Debbie and Tom can just review the report, and there might be something we can just extract from there that gives a concise consolidation of the findings, since we know most folks may not read the entire report. The last page. Okay, so maybe we'll just highlight the last page, and we'll point to that in future communications, and make it easy for folks to find on the website.
And it's not for lack of effort. I mean, I could go into detail about the number of transactions we look at, the number of departments we visit. You know, we're here for almost 2 weeks, and I think we come for 3 days during planning. So we really do try and beat you up as hard as we can with a smile. You know, and obviously if there was any significant issues, they would have been presented well before this meeting, so for everyone's consideration. But it was a positive audit, and it makes these kinds of presentations a little easier for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. I believe this is your second year with the
It's our
village.
second year, yeah.
So last year was a big learning year to meet the people and how we operate, and I'm delighted that we've had 2 good reports from you. Thanks so much. Thank you, Tom.
We're happy to continue working with you. We enjoy working with the village.
Please extend our appreciation to everyone in the department for all of the excellent work you all do. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you. All right, we're gonna go get dinner now.
Enjoy. Need any recommendations?
Hopefully local.
We'll be in we're working in Dobbs Ferry right now, so we'll be going to the Half Moon down there on the river.
Oh, you didn't need to advertise for another community. We can give you a list on your way out the door.
You know, I might get a 2-pager. You know, I might get a whole package.
All right. So
Moving right
next
along.
up.
Paul and Andy, I think, are they out in the hallway?
Yes, they are.
So the next 2 agenda items, one is an update on the Operations Center rehab project. The second is the update on the water treatment plant, and so I would have wanted to ask Andy and Paul if they would come and introduce the consultants. You can decide who wants to do which one.
Welcome.
Thank you for having us back, board. Thank you for the introduction, Manager McDonald. So we're going to discuss two projects with you tonight, both of which are in the design phase, both at different levels of design, and both of which have been in front of you before. So the first one we're going to discuss this evening is the Operations Center Rehabilitation Project. The board recollects when Andrew and I were first presenting this to you sometime last year, it was basically in concept phase with the same consultant whose representatives include Jay Pisco tonight, Megan O'Grady, who's going to do the majority of the presentation and is the project leader, and Veronica Burns. That said, when we first came in front of you to discuss this, it was also really coincided with the beginning of the tenure of the new manager. So we kind of held back a little bit until we had time for the manager to absorb what we were doing and get her input so we can implement some of her program decisions on where she would like to see the departments that were affected with this rehabilitation. So it became a little bit more than a three-stop elevator and a interior renovation of a lot of the storage space and the basement and what have you. So at that point, we had a series of meetings with the consultant and also with all the relative department heads for planning, building and code enforcement. So everybody's input was given to the project, and at that point, the team made some programming decisions, and they're going to get into those details tonight. But I think if from your recollection, you're going to see a little change to what you saw last time. And without stealing too much of Megan's fire, I'm going to say that we're right around the 30 to 35% completion level with these drawings. And you're going to have a good idea of what the floor plan definitely is, but not so much on the architecturals. But we're also going to talk about a lot of the key components that I know you're interested in. But I think, and if I may, Manager McDonald, I think what you're going to see tonight really has a focus on the building becoming customer-centric, if you will. And that's what we're going to present tonight. And we'll take questions at the end, and then we'll go into our second presentation on the dissolved air flotation plant. Thank you. Megan?
Good evening.
Hi.
Thank you.
All right. Moving over.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Don't worry. Good evening. So over the past couple of months, we've been working with the village to develop their needs of what they need for the renovation of the operations center. Over here, you can see what the existing floor plans look like. So currently, right now, the maintenance office is located down here, as well as the boiler room. All of the areas where attached in with the diagonals is unexcavated area, as well as they keep some storage back here for whatever is in the building. And then as we move upstairs, you'll see that this is the main entrance into the building, as well as, as well as the DPW department is located over here, a few conference rooms as you move down the hallway, as well as the village planning department, and IT is located down here. And then this is their main garage bay with all of their water departments back here. As we move to the second floor, currently the whole entire building keeps all of their file storage in this one location in here, as well as within each of their office spaces right now. And in developing the plan, we're trying to come up with more space for them to keep their file storage so it's easily accessible for everybody to enter into. And then over here we have the current town building department as well as the village department. In our new layout, we're proposing to install a three-stop elevator over here that will be a hydraulic system which is easy to maintain, as well as it will be able to have a for them to move their storage back and forth, as well as it's large enough to hold a stretcher in them, for, God forbid, if any emergencies that take place. The village also mentioned that they needed to keep some area for permanent storage, so we're proposing to gate off this area over here, so that way all of their storage is locked behind here, but it's still accessible within the whole office area, not to create any fire hazards. As we move up, we spoke with each of the departments to figure out how many occupants they have in each office, as well as to figure out what their specific needs were based on how many desks they'll need, whether they need conference rooms, storage rooms, and everything to make it easier for them to work. When we move into here, the first office on this side is the town building department, which would have a central office where everybody would be located, and then over here would be a window to allow for somebody. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the existing drawing. I'm sorry about that. It would be the village building department. So our hope is to have the person who's entering into the village building department be buzzed in by administration person over here, and then they can access everything that they need from the department within. Then over here, we created a central foil room because they're hoping to move everything to an electronic system. So if somebody has to come to this building and needs access to certain files that are public record, they can access them within here, as well as there's a window over here for them to speak with the person at the village building department. We created a men's and women's bathroom on this first floor, so that way no one has to travel upstairs or downstairs to get to the restrooms. And then over here, we have the village planning department. So it's one open office with a conference room, as well as a private office for the head person there. We moved the IT office over to the side here, so this way he no longer has to travel into somebody else's office to get to their office. Now he has his own door. And then at the end, we have the town building department, which is an open office concept as well as a private office. And then we're proposing in here to create storage on this side over here, which you'll see on the second floor plan where the mezzanine is located. So when we move upstairs, our goal is to have everybody have a communal cafeteria space where everybody can sit and mingle with one another. So this will be located over here, as well as provide storage. We're also proposing to turn the file storage area over here into a boardroom with the storage over here for them to pull the chairs in and out of at easy access, as well as creating a sound room over here, much like the one in the back over here, so that way the cameras can be on and it will be easy for him to control which cameras are on and which ones are off. And then we have a small boardroom over here for when voting needs to take place that needs to be done in private and not something that's done in the public. Then up here, it's very important for the maintenance guys to have a changing area as well as locker rooms. So over here, we're proposing a women's restroom as well as a women's locker room and changing room, and then a men's changing room and a men's restroom. And then on this end, we have the DPW department. So it's an open office concept as well, and then 2 private offices on the side. In this area over here, you can see that we're installing a brand new mezzanine level that will be at the same elevation as the second floor. So you can move in and out of the 2 floors. But on this mezzanine level, we're going to place one office as well as the office of the person who oversees everything that's done in the maintenance garage. Then they'll have additional storage up here where there'll be 2 sets of stairs, and then over here there'll be a detachable fence so that way they can forklift any of their storage items up to the top. Since we're also turning this into a boardroom, we'll need to provide a second means of egress so that way everybody can exit the space in case of any emergencies. So the first means of egress would be out the front door, and then the second means of egress would be along the roof walkway pads and then down this flight of stairs on the exterior of the building. We're also proposing for all of the roofs to be replaced, minus this one roof over here. And while replacing the roofs, we're currently speaking with a solar representative to see what their specifications are required in order to meet the needs to have solar panels be placed on the roof. So there are certain requirements that they need. Throughout the whole renovation process, we're going to be upgrading all of the lighting systems to LED lightings, which will save on your energy costs, as well as providing occupancy sensors. So when somebody leaves a room and forgets to turn off the lights will automatically turn off after a certain amount of time. In the maintenance garage, we're providing new exhaust systems, as well as creating exhaust vents that come down, so that way the guys can hook it right up to their cars, so that way it exhausts out into the building. We're also doing asbestos abatement for the floor tiles, because currently we believe that they do contain asbestos, so there'll be removal on that. We will also be upgrading all of the windows, because there currently are double pane windows, but as you can see when you look at some of the windows, there is moisture between the two double panes, which means they're failing the requirements that they need to be meeting, so they're really not as energy efficient as a regular double pane window would be. And when installing the elevator, we will need to add it on to the exterior of the building, so that way you can get a visualization of what the new elevator will look like. You can see over here, this is currently what the building looks like, and then this will be the elevator addition. So we still want to keep with the characteristic of the building, but make it look acceptable to the public, and so then it will match what the current building is looking like. For our current schedule, we just completed our 30% documents, and we're aiming to be at 50% by October 1st, 90% by November 10th, and 100% by December 15th, and then issuing it to the building department for their review. Followed by that, we'll issue and advertise for bid on January 1st, giving them a month for the bidders to review all the documents. We'll receive bids on January 30th, and then hopefully award the contract on March 1st, as well as start the construction at that time period. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, sorry.
Before you do, thank you. That was fantastic. Well, I think I was remiss in listening to her presentation. If I may, if it might benefit the public who's maybe hearing this for the first time, if I can do a quick recap of exactly what building we're talking about in the village. I just I should have done that to start, so I apologize for that. This is the John Paul Rodriguez Ossining Operations Center on Route 9A South. It's actually located in the town, but it is a village property, and for a reference point, it's just north of the soccer field of Vets Park. So hopefully most of us know what we're talking about there. And what takes place there is there's two buildings. In the rear building, there was a building that was constructed about 15 or 16 years ago. It's basically a modular panelized metal building, which is where all the equipment and highway and DPW and sanitation operations are stored. This is the administrative building, but it also houses the water department, distribution system employees and equipment, and central garage, which takes care of all the rolling stock in the village. In the front of the building, which is going to be the one that the public accesses the most, is where planning, building, code enforcement, and all public works operations, from stormwater, potable water, distribution system, highway, sanitary sewer, are all ran out of there. The administration and some of the operation folks as well are in there. That said, there is a lot of public interaction in all of the offices. However, it's really the planning, building, and code that it has the most, and I think that's really the genesis of bringing them downstairs. What this does is also makes the entire building ADA accessible. We already have the site plan that meets that accessibility, but this finishes to that end. It takes it to completion. So I think it's, again, very customer-centric building that houses 70 plus or minus DPW employees, and the minus the folks that are at the potable plant up in Crotonville, and the entire building maintenance operation, and everybody in planning, building, and code. So that said, now we'll open it up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we do have questions. Who wants to get us started? I'm looking at you, John, because you usually do get us started.
It's just, it seems like a progression from, some of the original conversations we had about improving the building. And I think that, in given a lot of the work that can be done in terms of just energy cost savings, you know, this really low hanging fruit. Everything from the LED lights to fixing the windows and hopefully, you know, executing a plan for solar panels on the roofs. I think, you know, I think all those measures together could actually, you know, pay for the loan to do the work. So I'm pleased.
Yeah. I'll echo John. I just had a few questions. So in any of the budgets that we discussed, the solar is not included in anything, or is it something that you've bid out already? Where are you with the solar? And I think you're only doing part of the roof, not both roofs, right? Or looking at, excuse me, not even doing.
The approach to solar that it changed a little bit with some of the, you know, implemented and pending changes in which you can benefit by installing solar in your house. So we'll leave that there, but we're still trying to take advantage of it and be responsible in that respect. So what we found is that because we pay such a low rate, because we are paying a municipal NYPA rate on our bill, which is for discussion purposes half of what a resident pays and would look to offset with solar power generated for their own house, we have entertained folks to talk to us about leasing our roof shed in that building and the back building. It really removes us from any responsibility of implementation and maintenance or even the coordination of the system itself, and we're just collecting rent, if you will, from someone who's leasing that space, but still being required to put it back on the Village of Ossining grid and make the village and town residents the benefactor of that. So there is still a sense that we're doing something locally to that end. We are speaking with one vendor now, but it's really very preliminary discussions that we're really having to make sure we do the appropriate structural components of the roof. I'm sure we're going to talk to more before we go out to final bid, and if that's still the case, if leasing is still the case when we're ready to actually do the bid, I'm sure we're going to look to do some type of concurrent contract, because we're going to want to implement it during construction, because a lot of those things are done concurrently as far as the dunnage and what have you on the roof. But yes.
So can you just, on a top line format, the building should be used for operations. That's its core objective, but it should also be used by the public, because we do need space for meetings. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, there's meetings all over the place. The library has become quite used. I mean, they're at capacity, I think. It was built with that intention, and it's being used with that way. And so there are committees from 10 people to meetings with 40, 50. So how many are on the main floor that are actually legitimate conference room?
It's a good point, and we did not expand on it here, but I'll do it now. There's presently 2 conference rooms in there that are utilized by a lot of the town and village groups that a lot of us really don't talk about often, like the environmental advisory boards. But that's also the main hub for the town and village planning and zoning boards. And sometimes their meetings are very large, and the parking lot gets very crowded and standing room only, and it's fire issues and a whole bunch of things that we're looking to avoid. Secondly, this own board and a lot of the other town and village boards have very often have a meeting, like next week, for example, that's probably going to be largely attended. This will offer a second venue for that, because it's the intent to take the map room on the 2nd floor. We call it the map room. It's really the smorgasbord storage room. And we're going to turn that into, and I'm going to ask for help here, a 50-seat. I'm going to give me an occupancy number here just so we can.
It should hold between 50 to 60 people.
Okay.
So on the first floor, how many public spaces do you have for meetings? It's all on the 2nd floor.
Everything's upstairs. Yeah. There's going to be a board room. We'll call it, I don't know what we're going to call it yet, but it's basically going to be a sidebar room for you to meet in executive session or private or anybody to meet in private session. That's going to be right next to the larger boardroom, which Megan just pointed out has 50 to 60 folks, and you know, including the dais and everything that we have at the police station now, which is live streaming television cameras, screens, and everything else to do a formal presentation regardless of your board. And there's also going to be a employee break room, which at night, if need be, can be converted into a second meeting room. A lot of those programming things are still very in the beginning stages right now, but that's definitely the intent.
So I mean, this is an updated presentation. You and I have had this conversation. There needs to be more rooms for more meetings because they're all occurring at 7 or 7:30 on 3 days of the week, predominantly. Even when they're videotaped, it's very poorly done because they're just shaped in the wrong way. And they're not multi-purpose rooms. Like, it's nice that the dining area, you're considering a multi-purpose, but they're not set up that way. And this is not set up that way either. You know, it's not really conducive. These long, narrow things, these are not multi-purpose environments, which is the way they should be built. So I'm not here to rethink your architectural designs, but closed offices in this day and age, not all that necessary. Multi-purpose rooms should be a top priority. And if the solar doesn't work, somebody should be looking at green roofs from an environmental point of view. It will actually save electric bills and energy bill right for that building, which I assume uses quite a bit of it, without having to think about, I mean, the solar piece is very complicated. Every year it changes. The county is involved, sometimes isn't. I'm aware of that. I know you've made a lot of efforts. So whatever day of the week we're talking, you'll tell us who you're meeting with regarding solar, because it is more complicated. And one more comment, the elevator shaft. So I just got out of a meeting earlier with the Gymnastic Association of whatever of the United States. So it's all about all eyes all the time when it involves both employees and the public. So elevator environments that are all brick but no glass are not that. And so just as a heads up, you might want to consider, because I think architecturally it would look more like the library, of having at least one wall that's glass so that there is some visibility. I'm not an architect. I'm not pretending to be one, simply sharing with something I heard earlier in the day. And it seems apropos based on, and it still would look nice. I think it would fit. And I know the library has used that, so a lot of windows. So from a light and from a visibility point of view, and not supposed to have any four walls where there's no visibility into it. And having to keep putting cameras in anywhere is really not a good environmental solution anyway. So just a food for thought. I'm just input, not, it's a work session.
Right.
So
But
sharing with you.
So a lot of the groups that use at the center now are using the conference rooms downstairs.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, rightfully, they're not set up right. They're long and linear, and it's very difficult to hear and see. We don't have the IT set up to do an actual presentation in a format that we would really like. So by moving all of that upstairs and being able to use a much larger room, we actually have more space, and it's more conducive to the meetings that are being held. I can also tell you that the groups that use it now all are using it either on a different day or a different time, and during the daytime when we're working, it provides great space for staff to have meetings with different people. But at nighttime, it also provides much better space for the public to come to either any of the planning board meetings or zoning board meetings, HPC, all of those. So I think you're actually going to see that you have much more space. We had toyed with the idea of having dividers, so you could divide the space if you needed two groups. It got a little bit complicated, I think, when we put the dais in, because we wanted to have a formal dais and a spot for, like they do at the court, so that this is where the board sits and this is where the public sits, and here's where you come and do your presentation, things like that. But then you're going to have cameras like we do in here, so you're not going to have what we have currently. I think it's all going to work out much better, and the gist of all of the operations will be on the main floor, so no one really has to use the elevator to go up and down unless you're going to the engineering department, and it's really a very small amount of people that do that. But I think that you'll be happy when it's done to see how much space is there. It's just not on the first floor. And we did look very much at security, and so I think it's important to note that the way the offices are set up is people will come down a common hallway, which will have security in them, but they will have to get buzzed into an office because one of our security issues
is if we have an incident, what happens, because we really have no escape plan. So that's why we did what we did.
Trustee Bazemore?
Actually, Trustee Levin asked most of my questions with respect to the solar panel. Just one question, like when you're remodeling the building, are there going to be any energy savings costs?
I think she touched on that a little, but without the final design, we can't really put a number to it.
Okay.
I could tell you that the new roof is going to have a new R rating, which is going to be more efficient, and we're replacing the windows. And our windows, the building was secured from the state, I believe, back in the late 80s by the town. I'm sorry, by the village manager at the time. It was converted into a village operations center, I believe, in the early 90s, and really nothing's been done to it as far as efficiencies. And it was a building that was built, I believe, in the 50s. So not so efficiency minded back then. So the windows are not efficient. The roof was not efficient. The lighting is definitely not efficient.
Okay.
And those three main components are all being addressed. I think we will definitely get a collateral benefit. I don't know if it's going to pay for the entire project, as Trustee Codman indicated, but it certainly help offset the debt service.
Didn't indicate he was doing wishful thinking.
I just want to mention about the HVAC. So right now, there's straight air conditioning in certain parts of the building, and the energy efficiency rating on those units are about 8.0. What we're going to be doing is all the conditioned spaces will be zoned off with heat pumps so that we can control the areas better, and the energy efficiency rating on those units are like 16. It's double the efficiency. So being that it's a heat pump, we'll be able to shut the steam system down earlier and start it up later in the season. And, that system itself is very inefficient, but it's a new boiler and it's steam throughout the building. We don't want to incur that cost. So that'll pay itself back fast.
Trustee Herrera?
Thank you. So with Perfect Segway's cost, what's the final cost or estimated cost of the whole project? Again, I know we heard it already, but I just wanted to make sure it's
I think when we first brought it to you,
guesstimate.
yeah, no, I understand. It's at a 30% concept. So a lot of the finished details and how far we take and what spec we put in a lot of these items, like windows, like the roof, are really a sliding scale right now. But we gave the architect a budget. We gave H2M a budget when we first started out of $3 to $4 million project. And that's when we were talking primarily elevator, the roof, still have the solar, and then do miscellaneous building improvements inside. We're making some program decisions. We're still going to try to hold them to that. However, we may exceed that, but I think we're really a little premature to start jumping into budget estimates and bonding estimates until we get to the 50%. Then we could start talking. But right now, like I said, it was a $3 to $4 million estimate to start. If it goes to 4 to 5 next time we're in front of you, we will have all the reasons why.
Thank you. I did want to piggyback off of what Trustee Levin mentioned earlier. I think that if we can, at this stage in the project, if appropriate, not narrow ourselves to traditional or conservative types of building when it comes to like private offices or the need for a formal dais. We could reimagine how it's supposed to look like when you go to a municipal meeting. Right? It doesn't have to be beautiful carved wood with light over the electeds or volunteers, or we could change the whole culture of what public meetings are when you go there. So I'm not necessarily against finding a different way for us to lay out rooms. So that's just
the manager discussed that with us. In fact, a lot of the things we talked about that are working into the floor plans now are she touched on it a little bit with like the customer window, with the separate foil room. Those are all things that are coming out of how they want to see it operate and what's best for the public versus how we're forced to operate it now. Same thing upstairs. We lay out our offices. Sometimes we have private meetings, so we need private meeting space when we're doing negotiation. But there's also the open space that was referenced as being a little more customer friendly that is going to be existing when someone comes into the main public works building. And using those department heads to determine the ergonomics of their office the manager has already expressed that anything that goes on in a boardroom is going to be discussed with you, so you get what you want to see in there as a finished
Go ahead.
product.
If I may, two comments, just for you guys to think about. So I like that it's not a legislative session, it's a work session. I can actually think and talk and all those kind of fun things. So I would like to tell you my pet peeves about bathrooms. They're actually very expensive, and once you build them, that's that. You do need, I'd like this to be more public oriented, not just staff. And so you do need some sort of public space for people to change, to have little children, if they need to bring children with them. I didn't see that on the plan. It doesn't mean you didn't build a family. And the family rooms, I'm sorry. There's changing tables in each of the bathrooms. And the reason I mention that, it's nice to have a family room for people who have multiple children, a son and a daughter. It causes issues when you have men and women. And oftentimes those bathrooms are also used for cross-gender folks because, at least the ones I've seen lately, because it's a private area. So if you have multiple children, you're a dad or a mom, it's very difficult to send your kid into a bathroom. It's just that once bathrooms are built, they stay for 50 years. And so I'd like to take the opportunity to think a little bit more about that, since it is more for public space and we have a lot of single parents and,
We will.
and it can be used differently. The other piece I'd like you to do is somebody from EAC. So it's okay to include us, and that's great, and it's okay that you include the staff in the discussion organizations, but you really, I think, should have somebody from like the EAC group be involved in the walkthrough. We did the walkthrough, but do the walkthrough and ask them how they'd like it to be done, because they're on committees and they have their pet peeves about, how there's never any water, for example, after they're there for 3 hours and they can't find any water or fountains or any place to drink from, or unless you're there, you don't, and you know it because you guys work there, but from their point of view late at night, I'd really appreciate a couple of like citizen type involved in this on a regular basis, not just, once.
So regarding the
Thanks.
bathrooms, again, you're right. That's why we're here. This is a work session. We can certainly look. One thing we did with the bathrooms, if you know where the bathrooms are now versus what you just looked at on the proposed layout, they're all kind of around where the bathrooms are now. So there is a little benefit of using the existing piping that's in the walls and the floor and what have you to do the bathrooms. The bathrooms are basically going to be rehabilitated at the bathroom proper, but not really running a lot of new piping, rough-in piping. And we will certainly see what we can do with regard to creating a bathroom of that nature. I'm going to say in my mind right now, probably on the first floor, because that's going to be a large part of public access, unless we think about it on the second floor too, because that's where the public meetings are. But that's something we'll throw into the next conversation agenda at our project meeting.
And just so I'm clear, these are all inside the envelope of the building and the roofs. Nothing changes on the outside of
The
it.
elevator shaft does.
The elevator shaft, I consider that the building, but there's nothing on the grounds that, this is just, I just want to make sure, because I just didn't know if that was added or not.
The only thing that is going to change, if you will, on the grounds is we're going to bring some of the stuff that's stored outside, like the larger, the heavy equipment tires and the sanitation tires that are stored outside. We're going to bring them in, create more parking spaces, because we're going to be able to bring more stuff inside into central garage storage area, and we need it because it's a heavily used building. It
You
really
had
is.
that in the last update,
Yeah.
the whole piece about the outside, so I didn't know where we were, so that was my
Yeah.
sort of hint to figure out what happened with that conversation, so, thanks.
And Paul, I want to thank you for your update. This next piece is more like for us. So the building is definitely being used to the best that it could be. We're definitely at a point now for personnel and public matters to, update it and make, better use of it. I like the idea of having an open concept when it comes to a boardroom and its uses. However, I'm concerned, and I always have been, it's not necessarily the easiest building to get to, and not all residents have access to get to it, right? So at some point, can the majority of residents go to the building for a meeting? Do they go to it now? Where's the closest bus stop? How much does it cost from different points in the village for a cab? That's going to affect our involvement, our feedback, our response. So I just want to just keep that. I'm thinking more out loud. I'm not suggesting anything. I just don't really know yet how to proceed with that, but just wanted to point that out.
Well, the benefit of going last is that I work with people who can all read my mind. So that was very helpful. Everybody asked all the questions. And thank you very much, Megan, for your work, and Paul and Andy for taking into consideration so many of the concerns that have been raised throughout this process. I look forward to seeing it at the 50% design. Any last comments you wanted to share with us, Megan, before you say goodnight? No, she's moved on. Good. Alrighty. Next up, I think Paul and Andy are sticking around, right?
They are going to stick around. So the water treatment plant is up next. I do want to say that it's been a pleasure to work with this firm as they walk out the door on this project, and their unique ideas and things have really benefited us, and I think that you'll see a good product when we're all done. So
good.
I'd like to turn it back over to Village Engineer Paul Fraioli to introduce the water treatment plant project.
Thank you again, Manager McDonald. So we're back to discuss a much more detailed presentation on the dissolved air flotation plant that we proposed some time ago. I'd like to give a little background on how we got to where we got while Representative from Hazen and Sawyer, Ms. Julie Herzner, is loading her presentation, which is going to be the bulk of this evening's presentation, to talk about the design and some of the parameters in the plant. I introduced Julie. I'd also like to introduce in the audience Michael Broder, who's the project manager for this particular project, also from Hazen and Sawyer in Manhattan. And of course, Andrew Teese is with me, our water superintendent. So again, when we were last in front of you, we were discussing a lot of the concept plans, the type of treatment that Superintendent Teese was recommending and why we were doing it. But again, to serve as a quick recap like we did on the Operations Center project, this plant is being constructed because even after a lot of the water conservation measures and a lot of the improvements that Superintendent Teese has made in the distribution system and on just the overall efficiency of the distribution, the pump stations, and the plant itself, we still know to be responsible to support what the comprehensive plan predicts will be our usage in the future. We need to build a state-of-the-art facility, and that's what we're proposing you tonight. And I'm going to let Julie talk about the details of that and the flow design parameters and what have you. But I want to tell you what Andrew and I have been doing while Hazen and Sawyer has been doing the design work. So since our last concept plan late last year, we have Hazen and Sawyer has taken the development plans to 90%, which is where they are now, and that's what you're going to see tonight. Essentially, what 90% represents is everything except the finishing touches, some of the architectural details, and a lot of the other boilerplate and fill-in work that is going to make it ready for public bidding. Before it goes to public bidding, it has to go through some regulatory review, which Andrew is going to review with you before he turns it over to Hazen and Sawyer. And then some of the things we've been doing while the design was going on is we went and visited with the town representatives to have informal internal meetings, and then we formalized it last June 20th when Superintendent Teese and I accompanied Hazen and Sawyer at the June 20th planning board session in the town up at the Operations Center. At that point, the drawings were at about 75%. The reason we're going to the planning board, because even though we're a municipality, we're a different municipality, so we didn't really look to avoid any of the development parameters that anybody else that was looking to develop in the town would go through, because we wanted to be completely transparent of what we were doing for the benefit of the end users, which are village and town residents, as you know, because we are purveyors for both. So we went to the planning board on June 20th, took some comments in, made some changes based on the comments, also discussed some of the parameters of our presented site plan and how it relates to zoning. And then we went back again recently to the August 2nd planning board meeting. Both those meetings are online on the YouTube channel. I think a link was provided in your packages to review prior to the meeting. If you haven't watched it yet, I think it would be great to watch it, because there's a lot more detail, particularly with the site itself, that we went into in those presentations at the town planning board that would be good for you guys to have your arms around as we present this to the the public as we look to go bidding on the schedule. It's going to get shown to you. So again, we went on August 1st planning board meeting. They're sending us to zoning. We anticipate this town zoning board to be one meeting. We have a very, it's a minor variance issue that we're going to address, and Julie's going to talk about that a little bit. We don't anticipate any problem. We've already talked to the zoning officer in the town. He doesn't anticipate any problem. So I think we'll be back out of there. The town is declaring itself as lead agent, and we'll be back in front of the planning board within a couple of months with hopefully a final site plan approval. At that point, we'll be already at 100% construction documents, and then Andy has some work to do with the regulatory agencies, which he's going to talk to you about now, and then I'll turn it over to Julie.
Thank you. So, if the public doesn't know, the current state of the plant, it's in good shape, but it's older. It's 35 years old. It's a 4 million gallon per day plant. There were times even though it's a wet summer, but it's a hot summer, there were times when we approached 3.9 million gallons a day. The new plant needs to be designed to handle that future capacity of heavy demand days. The good news is in the last year, we've reduced the consumption. Normally this time of year, we would put out 3.7 on an average day if it was, this type of weather, wet weather, but still hot. Right now we're down to 3.3. So that's a big drop with the leaks that we've found, the consumption, the education to the public. So we're in the right direction. We wanted to make sure that we looked at that avenue before we over-designed this plant. So the plant would meet its demand and not be oversized. So with the health department regulations, once the 90% drawings are complete, which they are now, Hazen and Sawyer will meet with us with the local health department. They're going to be the lead agency to review this whole design. We've met with them a few times. They want us to use UV as the main disinfectant because it's like using solar. It's almost like a tanning bed, but it kills the viruses and deactivates viruses, and the benefit would be that we'd use less chlorine out in the system, so it's less cancer-causing disinfectant byproducts. So they're going to go through the whole design, but we wanted, before we got too far into the design, we wanted to make sure the health department was on the same page with us, so we wouldn't waste engineering money. And I think that's it. I think the health department's that's gonna be a smooth process, but let Hazen sort of talk about their design. Go ahead, Julie.
Thanks, Andy. As Andy said, the Department of Health will be reviewing the project as the lead. The Town of Ostening's Planning Board's the lead agency on the project. But I'm going to probably repeat a couple of things that Andy and Paul just told you about the existing facility, and then I'll talk to you about the new facility. Hold on a second. Just middle. Just pull it down. Roller. Got it. Alrighty. All right. So as Andy said, the major expansion of the plant was around 1986, but the original plant was constructed in 1930. So the plant's been there for a long time. The village is doing a really great job at keeping the plant running, and it's actually running well. It meets all of the regulations that are required for the filtered water turbidities and other water quality parameters and goals that the village needs to meet. Many improvements have been made over the last 10 years, including rehabilitation of the flocculation tanks, the filters, and there's an air-supported structure that's over the outdoor tanks that had been installed, which would not be needed in moving forward when the new plant is constructed. If you don't know, the supply, the raw water supply to the existing Indian Brook water treatment plant and to the new plant is from the new Croton Reservoir via the old Croton Aqueduct, as well as the Indian Brook Reservoir, which is located on site. The majority, or I'd say about 65% of the water is coming from the new Croton Reservoir based on historical data. The existing treatment plant consists of a pre-oxidation process where potassium permanganate is added to the water as an oxidant, and then it moves on through traditional pre-treatment processes, which are coagulation, flocculation, and that's processes that just basically take particles in the water and allow them to be made larger so they they flock together and you can settle them basically out of the water. So the existing water treatment plant has a settling basin for clarification of the water prior to gravity filters, and then post-treatment chemicals are added, including chlorine as prior to a clear well that provides contact time for chlorine to disinfect the water, and then it moves into the distribution system. As Andy was talking a little bit ago about the capacity of the plant, it's a 4 million gallon per day capacity. It sounds like recently you had a 3.9 million gallon per day day for a couple of days in the summer. Over the life of this project, as Andy said, a lot of leaks have been found, and so the system's been tightened up. And whereas a couple of years ago, you kind of were topping over 4 MGD in the middle of the summer sometimes?
Actually, there were times when we were above 5 MGD.
Okay. And so that's been great that there's a lot of leaks that have been corrected in the system, improved. And so that pressure's off from that. But we had looked a couple of years ago when we were in here, we talked about a water demand study where we looked at growth within Ossining and what possible future demands might be. And there were 5-year and up to 25-year projections that were made, and maximum flow on the 5-year projected peak monthly average is 4.5 MGD. That was based on about a year and a half ago study that was done. And then peak flows in the future over a 25-year period for peak monthly average is 6.8 MGD. So when looking at all of this at the beginning of the project, we decided that the appropriate size for the new water treatment plant would be 7 MGD. So the new water treatment plant's been designed for that, with the allowances of possibly expanding to 8 MGD if needed over the future. But with the leaks being corrected recently, it seems that the 7 MGD should be enough in the future, and it would not be necessary to try to expand to 8 MGD. This is just showing a block diagram of the proposed trains. You'll see some of the processes I mentioned earlier are shown here too. I apologize, we're missing the potassium permanganate still being added as a pre-oxidation chemical at the very beginning of the process. No longer for the purpose that it was originally used, and more just to ensure that there are no taste and odors associated with the water. Ossining's always been adding that chemical, and if we removed it from the process train, there's a possibility that taste and odor that no one would detect right now would be detected in the future. So the dose will be lower than what's used now for the purpose of taste and odor control. Moving into the plant, there's a rapid mix phase where we add the pretreatment chemicals, disperses in this phase, it disperses the chemicals, and then I mentioned earlier in the flocculation basins, the particles are brought together. In this case, we're trying to neutralize the particles so that they can be floated. So this is a little different than what's happening in the existing plant, where you're making larger particles to settle. Here we're using something called dissolved air flotation. There are concrete basins, and at the entrance to the basin, there are headers that bring in dissolved air, so saturated air, in water, and microbubbles float up through the basin and pick up the small particles and attach the to the bubbles to get floated to the surface, and then a skimmer scrapes the particles off the surface every 4 hours or so. And after it moves through the clarification basins, it moves into gravity filters that are similar to the existing filters. And as Andy indicated, UV disinfection has been included in this project for the purpose of primary disinfection of Giardia and Cryptosporidium, and then chlorine is being used for primary disinfection of viruses. Chlorine will also be used to carry a residual into the distribution system. And there are a couple of other chemicals that are added post-treatment: fluoride, which is currently used, and then sodium hydroxide and phosphoric acid are for corrosion control within the distribution system. Okay, so the existing site is shown here with the red border. This is the water treatment plant right now. The air structure that I mentioned, you see Indian Brook Reservoir here, and the proposed location for the new plant is right over here. And I have a couple of drawings to show that might be a little bit difficult, but I'll walk you through here. This is the entrance, the existing entrance to the water treatment plant. We are, reusing the same exact entrance. There's replacement of the entrance gate. There'll be a new kind of a pillar with the village's sign on it, indicating that it's a water treatment plant. The road is being widened through the site for ease of deliveries in the future, and there's a pump station that is here. Let's see, I think it's on the next drawing. Yes. So there's an existing pump station that will be rehabilitated to provide a location to store the potassium permanganate I mentioned as a pre-oxidation agent. The water coming in through here is coming from the old Croton Aqueduct, and then the water supply coming in from Indian Brook is coming, it's kind of off the page over here. So there's two source water points. They both travel towards the water treatment plant that's located here. Before I move off this slide, I just want to point out, and I have a couple more slides about the green roof. Much of the roof is covered with a green roof. There's 12,000 square feet of green roof on the project to meet the New York State DEC stormwater requirements. So it's more for water quality than storage, but it will provide storage for the release of stormwater off the site. And a couple of other key features on the site are the bioretention basin here, and this is a storage chamber for stormwater up here as well. This is a below grade structure, as well as this here. On the civil site drawing, it's hard to tell that that would be a below grade structure. And then lastly, this is the last, piece of the entire site plan. You see the existing water treatment plant here. This is the kind of the dam wall of the Indian Brook Reservoir, and we have our new potassium permanganate building here, which is a fairly small building that's also being added to the site. This is the entire site plan now that you can see together. This really is here to outline an area, which is actually a pretty small area right here, of a wetland that is being impacted by this project. It's about 0.14 acres. The larger area you see here is the buffer zone around that wetland. The town of Ossining has a buffer zone requirement for wetlands, and we're impacting area in the buffer zone. So we're looking, when we mitigate the wetlands, to not only mitigate the smaller wetlands area that we're directly impacting, but also the area of the buffer zone that we're impacting. The wetland delineation was conducted about a year ago. We had a couple of people out on site identifying where the wetlands, the boundary of the wetland existed. And this wetland actually is, it's not a New York State DEC freshwater wetland. It doesn't show up on that wetland map. It's a very small wetland. It's mapped by NWU. Excuse me, it's not. It's only actually showing up in New York State, United States Army Corps engineers map. So that's where it's being regulated through Army Corps. And then also, of course, the permitting requirements that are required by the town of Ossining. So the permit that we need to supply for Army Corps is a nationwide permit. As Paul indicated earlier, we've met with town of Ossining twice now. We've discussed the wetland with the town, and we'll have further discussion with the zoning board when we meet with the zoning board. I mentioned the buffer zone already is a 100-foot buffer zone, so the overall impact is about 1.07 acres. So we're looking for good locations to mitigate wetlands right on site. We've picked a couple of locations, probably not enough to get to about 1 acre. There had been some talk about also rehabilitating areas where there's non-native species on site. So there's possibility of combinations to try to mitigate the wetlands, at least in the buffer zone, to try to deal with the non-native species around the reservoir. As part of this project, we're also going to be impacting trees in the area. I showed you where the new plant will be located. We did a tree survey about a year ago as well. We identified all the trees that will impact. There's 91 trees we're impacting. The town requires 50% of tree restitution, so replacing 50% of the trees we're removing based on the diameter at breast height. So we've currently located 15% of the trees back on site. There's not enough room on the site to get all of the trees back on, which they're mostly located around the new construction. So we'd be looking to locate the remaining percentage off-site, and we'll be working with the village to do that over the next, I'd say, 3-4 months. And then lastly, Paul had mentioned a minor variance that we're going to the zoning board to discuss, and that is, so the plant is in this R30 zone with the requirements shown here. So the front yard setback in R30 is 35 feet, and we are slightly over that in the front yard setback, and the amount we're over is 350 square feet is over that area. You know, the plant is, we've paid very close attention to making sure the plant is as compact as possible. It's a pretty small site we're working with. So we feel confident that there's no way we could have gotten this plant any smaller than it is. And we're, you know, still faced with this front yard setback, which is not very large, but we'll talk to the zoning board about it. The overall height of the stair tower, which you'll see in a moment, is less than the 35 feet height, 35-foot height requirement that Town of Ossining requires for that R30 zone. And so here is a rendering of the site. I want to point out that there's been a lot of discussion about the tile on the building and the colors that are selected here. And so our architects were choosing a couple of other options. We heard a lot of comments regarding earth tones. So what you're seeing here is not actually going to be the coloring of the plant, and we will have new renderings shortly to show the planning board and others. But just wanted to point that out as we go. And everything else is the same though. This is, you know, the stair tower. We have an elevator located right next to it. Does not go up as high as the stair tower. It would bring somebody from the lower level to the operating level. And that's it. There's some equipment associated with the elevator on the roof. The stair tower, however, lets people up to access the green roof to maintain that green roof. And on a higher roof here, slightly higher elevation, we have all the HVAC equipment. And so I can show you each elevation of the building. This is the south elevation, which is the front of the building. The main entranceway is shown here. Elevator, the man door within the stair tower, and then there's another entrance over here by a shop. Here's the back of the building. And yes, this is the side of the building. Sorry, this is where the Clarewell was. I just realized, so the west elevation. So there's another door into that elevation. Here's the back of the building. So a lot of the back of the building is tankage, the side of the tanks. We had to locate this building on site hydraulically so that the front of the building is actually in line with the road, the back of the building, because of the way the site is graded. It falls steeply. And so there's a back face here. We're doing things when working with the architects to add visual interest to the concrete, and taking the planning board's recommendation and request and the architectural review board's request to use earth tones on the back of the building, as well as trying to use landscaping to mask some of the building where we can. And then the last elevation is around the east side, and this is an area where chemical delivery trucks would pull in. There are chemical cabinets located here, here, and here, and a roll-up door and a man door, as well as this door is into the fluoride room to kind of give a separate entrance into that room. So the green roof was a major component of this project to meet the stormwater requirements, but there's a lot of other advantages of having a green roof. As I heard earlier today, there's already an understanding that it has, benefits to mitigate heat island effects, to keep the building cooler. It's oxygen producing and a carbon sink. It reduces dust and smog, and as well as rain. It collects rainfall volume, so it reduces the volume at one time releasing from the site. And the main reason why we were locating it on the roof of the building was filtering stormwater to achieve water quality benefits. And this is just a cross section of green roof that we're looking at. The 12,000 square feet will be covered with this sedum. The areas that are not covered with it are being covered with this pavers, so it's a similar roof system underneath. The pavers are allowing for walkways around, and then there's the one area that is at the upper roof where we've located the HVAC equipment so that we didn't have to try to locate that among the green roof. And this is just a photo of an example of a similar green roof on a project that Hazen and Sawyer worked on in Manioc in Philadelphia. And so this is similar to the growth we'd have on the green roof here at Indian Brook. And that's it for my presentation tonight. The next steps are, it seems like Paul wants to add to it, but we'll be going to the zoning board, as I mentioned, and then the DOH approval.
Thank you, Julie. Clearly, I think that, again, represented why Hazen and Sawyer is doing this project, because of their experience in all the components that we want to see. Andy's going to get into that in a little bit. But I thought it would benefit us now if I took a couple of minutes to talk about what came out of the 2 planning board meetings and some of the internal meetings that we had with the town as maybe a preemptive strike to some of your questions that you're going to have, and then we can
Preemptive strike.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's probably a good policy in this case. Go right ahead.
I like it.
Okay. I'm lost for words a little bit tonight, so excuse that. One component about the green roof is that the manager's office has us trying to get a grant for that. And hopefully we'll have good news about that. And we're in the midst of applying for that, but that would be a nice thing if we get that to offset that environmental component. So a couple of things that came out of the planning board. I can't say they got a large residential contingent that attended, but it is televised and there's a lot of views on their YouTube channel. And I know, it's a small town, so information gets around. And Andy actually even hosted some of the planning board members, and we're very good neighbors up there. This building is going to make us even better neighbors. They asked about the lighting. All the lighting is going to be down lighting, and it's only going to be lighting up the areas where we have to have walking access. The entire operation is going to be fully enclosed, and not just by an air structure, which is what we have now, fully enclosing everything. It's going to be enclosed by bricks and mortar. So sound attenuation is going to be exponentially better than what we have now. Truck traffic and operations and deliveries are going to be like they are now, except truck traffic is going to be reduced because the dissolved air flotation system is a much more efficient way of processing potable water sludge. So the truck's going to be a lot less. And that's another good thing that the Waterview and the Crotonville residents were happy to hear. Yeah. Chlorine gas, which if you remember a few years back, our neighbors in Croton used chlorine gas for their treatment system and their distribution system, and they had a leak and they had an injury, a serious injury. It's fatal. That is no longer a component of treatment at this plant. But I was going to save that for you. So yeah, and the biggest visual aesthetic is, although we don't really know what the programming use is going to be of the existing plant once this plant is brought online, and it's no time soon. This plant has to be built over probably 2 years and probably started up and tweaked over another year. So maybe in 3 years' time we could start talking about a beneficial use of the old plant. But one thing that we're going to do when we do start the new plant is that air structure will come down, and that's probably one of the biggest visual issues that the Waterview residents have. And they won't have that anymore. They'll have I think, especially when the leaves are down in the winter, a much more picturesque view of our new earthen dam and the surrounding woods that are in that area. It's very beautiful. I know you've all been there at least once, and it's really it's our little hidden gem, but it's it's a good thing to have. So that's what came out of their planning board. We still continue to take questions and work with them during our application process, but Andy has a couple more things to add.
Getting back to that view, the residents from Waterview are going to look down on the green roof. They're up higher, so they're not going to see a sea of black tar. They're going to see grass, which is nice. I just want to get back to why. I know I probably should have said it at the beginning, but we picked Hazen and Sawyer because they've designed 5 of these filtration plants throughout New York City in this area. And looking at what the health department would normally require, they would normally require us to pilot test this process from the beginning. But since there's other filtration plants designed by Hazen with the same design, with the same water quality, and actually the Croton water, they allowed us to use those results, which saved us like $2 million in pilot costs. So it was a big reason why we picked them. One thing about the trees coming down, which Hazen brought it to my attention, we have to be concerned because of the bats. We're not allowed to take down trees in a certain, what's the time period? November through March. When we can take the trees down. So we'll probably have a separate contract for a tree company to come in and take the trees down ahead of time because we don't want the whole progress to stop and we have to wait another year. And I think that's it.
I'm sure there's questions. Yeah, John's ready to go.
I honestly don't have any questions about the plan. I mean, it's consistent with prior presentations. We're just getting a little farther along. So.
No questions. Thank you.
You did such a good job preempting, striking that.
Yeah, I have a feeling I'm not going to hear the last of that, but I'll throw one out there anyway.
You should have just said okay and walked away.
No, I
at that
get it.
point. Now you're opening another door.
I'm trying to be responsible. One thing that I'm sure you're eventually going to ask, we originally thought upwards of $40 million for this design when we first started doing the anticipated flow. And we're right around that number, but we're a little closer to 35 as a construction cost. This will be a, unless there's a project labor agreement, these are things that we still have to talk about with Corporation Counsel and the manager's office, but unless there's a PLA on this job, it is most certainly going to be a Wickes law job, which is a state requirement to allow the 4 different prime contractors, general, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical, to bid 4 separate contracts. That's what we're anticipating right now in their design documents. And that's why we're going to have 4 different bid documents go out there right now, again, unless there's a PLA. But then there's another layer of administration that goes along with that. So we're going to bring what is ever the most beneficial for the village for you to consider. But again, $35 million is right about what we're thinking for an all-in construction cost. The consulting cost associated with that construction is already worked into Hazen and Sawyer's existing contract. We signed on to that when we signed their design contract.
It's not about the project per se, but as a mom of a recent engineer, and you know how much I enjoy the tour, Andy, the 3 hours we spent looking and actually understanding half that chart. It's a great part of being a trustee is that I get to learn something new all the time, so I thank you. But I said it at the last presentation, I just need to hear myself say it again. These are great opportunities for students in our high school to learn about engineering. It's great opportunities for possible employment for all members of our community. I don't hear that in a lot of the presentations, but I do want to hear more about how this might create some jobs. There's a lot of stuff going on over there. There's a lot of stuff with people interested in environmental sciences, engineering, water engineering, I mean, all of these things, paid, unpaid, whatever. We've spoken about it, but they don't seem to make it to the presentation. So I just would like you to think about that. You don't need to answer me now, and you don't need to. I just want you to there are job opportunities and learning opportunities for our community. I'd like to make that happen.
I don't know if this is going to be an answer, but to add to it, this summer again, this is I think I'm going to say the 5th summer in a row that we hosted 2 STEM-oriented college students at the plant. that spend the majority of their time at this plant, and then because of our relationship with our neighbors, they spend some time at the Millwood plant, which is a DAF plant, which is what we're going to be building. So that was a nice thing to do. We also had Ossining High School student with us in Public Works this summer who did spend some time at the plant, as well as in the other Public Works building. And it's a good point you raise, although the interns to date have all been STEM oriented that have come there. It's a very technical, it has a lot of technical components. So it's good to show off and teach. But there is, our chief filter plant operator is also the head of the local chapter of the American Waterworks Association Education Committee. So he's very passionate about exactly what you're saying, and you are spot on when I tell you that there is a going to be a void in the next 5 to 10 years in operators and people who are trained to operate plants like this. And that's not always necessarily, although they do have operators that have college degrees and even master's degrees. It's not a necessity, and it does open a door for a high school graduate to pursue that career. So that's something I think as we go through this process, we'd be best served to consider, because we do want to keep village employees operating this.
I'll give
That's
you a
our goal.
call tomorrow. I mean, I want to speak to the superintendent, educate, and just get more of the kids out there and get turned on by all this and possibly jobs.
Yeah.
Thanks.
One thing, during design, working with, Paul and Andy, and architects, the new plan is taking advantage of, public access. As you walk in the front, the village, I grew up in the county, and, I pretty much water history throughout the county. And the village has a pretty long one going back to the 1880s with the reservoir and a couple of dams that never got built. But a lot of that information, you see some of it in the existing plant. When you walk in, you're looking at drawings, hand-drawn, colored drawings of the dam. There's more water history there. And I give talks at schools and things like that, but not for the employment aspect, but also just to get them interested and to make more engineers, because you're not going to, you're always not going to have enough engineers. That's just biased opinion. But the new plan is taking advantage of that, where when you do look at things like the first floor, the entrance, places for, displays, and Andy's tours of the plant, being able to view the processes easily and being separate from them, for, children, teenagers, even the adults, and, actually showing off what should be justifiably proud as a piece of public works. This is not something to be hidden. Years ago, people used to have celebrations when plants opened up and bridges opened. These days, people don't want to hear about it. But you should turn that around and, take advantage of your new facility to do that, and drum up the interest for engineers. Again, biased.
Did you think of something you wanted to say?
No, this is actually a comment to Debbie. Just thinking about Trustee Levin's comments. We do have opportunities where high school students and college students are able to go on the plant. It's helpful that people know that. So this is one example where we need to kind of blast that out and find multiple ways to let people in the community know.
Sure. Well, I do want to say that here in the village of Ossining, we very much celebrate infrastructure achievements. And we had a big ribbon cutting with our new earthen dam there, and I look forward to being able to invite the public into this new building in a few years, and I look forward to touring it myself. Thank you very much to the folks from Hazen and Sawyer for bringing so much expertise to this project so that it could go through so smoothly and get us to this phase at this point. Paul and Andy, I'm delighted that both of your projects tonight had rooftops that serve for something other than just keeping the rain out. You're looking to produce energy and to reduce the stormwater runoff and actually just beautify the whole landscape for the community. So I'm very pleased about those components. And I just want to point out to the public, we haven't talked about water in a while. I feel like a couple of years ago we talked about water almost every week. The 5 MGD rates that we saw a couple of years ago that have come down from a variety of our efforts to tighten up the system are reaping multiple benefits. part of the reason why we see these incredible spikes is during this episodic weather, where we see droughts, we see multiple 90-degree days. People water their lawns more, they just make more, they just use more water, and that's when we're seeing these spikes in the usage, and that unfortunately seems to be getting more extreme, not less. So that's part of the reason for the increased demand. It's one of the components of why we have an increased demand. But one of the reasons that we've been able to reduce demand on our existing system is through these the initiatives that you folks undertook with the grants. And I just want to remind folks that there is still the toilet replacement system, and they can learn about that by going to thevillageofossining.org. Go to the departments, Public Works, and you'll see the toilet replacement system. And what that is you can get a free toilet for your house. It's a low-flow toilet. There's an application right on there. So I would encourage.
Not
Yes,
there
sir?
yet because
What?
the city is reviewing the contract.
Are you kidding me?
No. The city is reviewing the contract because the city required a contract that we have with Rim Plumbing, and they are in the process of reviewing that contract.
You can still apply.
And then,
Just might take a
and then
while.
hold it.
But you can still apply, get in the queue, and then as soon as we're ready, we can then distribute.
Plenty of
them.
time to design your new
Please think
bathroom
about
around
it.
your new toilet. Okay.
And there's only so many toilets, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a
Getting.
limited numbers, so get in line. You know, I think that's the plan here, right?
Alrighty. Let me just ask one question because it gets asked of me by community members when it comes to the processing. Fluoride, that's part of the stage. Is it recommended, required? And if it's required, by whom?
It's a pretty political question, but the old plant was.
I'm asking from a scientific recommendation perspective.
Scientifically, it's recommended from my standpoint. It's the old plant was designed with it. We've been feeding fluoride for the last since 1986. The new design is there. I've dealt with the health department and asked them, you know, what's their recommendation. Their recommendation is for fluoride, and I said, you know, through the years I've had a couple of residents that were against it. What's the protocol? Is it a referendum? And they said it's you have to prove logistically why you think it's a bad idea, and it's a public vote. It's a policy decision. It's something that needs we included it in the design. So.
I can tell you that in my last city, we had this similar debate, and one of the ways that we were able to explain to the community not only the benefits, I know there's a disadvantage as well, but there's the level of fluoride that goes in. And Andy, I don't know if you know what that level
0.8 milligrams per liter.
Very low amount of, it's not like you're getting this huge, you know, like you're drinking a big bottle of fluoride. But it's still a very minor amount.
There's natural fluoride in the water, 0.25 milligrams per liter. There's parts of the country that there's too much fluoride that's naturally occurring. So it's not only used for, you know, for dental purposes, but it's as an operational benefit. We measure fluoride in all water that we find out in the streets anywhere. And for example, if we have an area that's pooling water and it's raining out or it's dry out, we can determine if that's our drinking water or if that's storm water. It's used for tracer studies, but it's also it's a policy decision. So.
Is that standard across Westchester County?
I don't know how many communities, but I've worked for certain communities that did not add it. Now Kisco doesn't add it. Newcastle does. I'm thinking of filtration plants that I've worked at. It's a policy decision, but it's in the design.
Okay. I'm not making a recommendation. I'm asking a question because I don't have enough information to make a recommendation. Others? Thank you very much. And thank you. I just want to say that I think we should take a 2-minute break because we have another big presentation. We've been going at it for a couple hours almost now. We'll be back in just a moment. righty.
Right.
It's okay. We used to always do it like this,
Ambiance.
actually.
Much better.
Yes, with fewer lights, right?
All righty.
All right.
Welcome back. We still have one major presentation and one minor discussion. Debbie, please introduce this for us.
All right. Well, we were, IFCA approached us and asked if we would be interested in looking at the Broad Street corridor with them. And they had hired Pattern Progress to do an analysis for us. So tonight we're going to hear the report of the results of things. So I want to introduce Karen so she can give a little bit of the background of what she was thinking and how this all came about, and then she can introduce our folks from Patterns for Progress.
Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, Karen. What hat are you wearing right now?
Pardon me?
What hat are you wearing
I
right
am
now?
wearing my IFCA hat.
Excellent. Executive Director
So,
of IFCA.
yes,
Welcome.
Karen DeTore, Executive Director of Interfaith Council for Action, otherwise known as IFCA Housing Network. We do affordable housing here in the village of Ossining, for anyone who may not know that. This came about because housing has been such a huge issue nationally, and we really feel it here at home. And so many of our discussions, I know amongst the village board at the town level and really across the county, about how do we meet the growing population needs and the diverse needs of that population. So how are we going to do all this? We live in a really, really super expensive county. And we have a lot of people to house, and we need people, we need to make sure that people who work in jobs that we need desperately, whether it's people in our school district, in our hospitals, a myriad of jobs that are critical to our well-being and our economic well-being, as well as our health well-being, who don't always have a place to live, because it's really hard to live in Westchester if you don't make a six-figure salary, and we all know that. So for a long time, over 50 years, IFCA's been doing rehabilitation of housing and renting it affordably. And we're happy to say that virtually all of the properties that we own rent approximately 60% AMI and below, almost all of them. Some are lower, depending on different subsidies, and we'll talk a little bit about programs that are available. But one thing we were concerned about with the development that's coming on, we know most of the development that's coming online now is luxury housing, and we do have a housing set aside, but we all know that at 80% area median income, our 10% set aside is not meeting the need for people at the lower income levels. So Ossining, being very progressive, it was progressive when it established that set aside, it was one of the first communities to do it, is now looking at ways to increase that and make it more affordable, which we think is great. The issue is, though, what's going to happen on Broad Avenue when you have 190 units of luxury housing planned coming in on a block that hasn't really been invested in over the last few years. This is the block that IFCA sits on. I'm talking about the Hudson Step project. So what's going to happen there? And we've been really thinking about that. How do we make sure that we maintain the economic growth that we've seen on Main Street and attract the various income levels that we need to make everything thrive, but how do we make sure that people aren't displaced? How do we make sure that we have room for everyone? And how do we really, really commit to what we all say we believe in Ossining, where we value socioeconomic, racial, and ethnic diversity? That's what we all say. That's what it comes up time and time again as the thing that people love most about their community. So we bring a lot of resources. IFCA is part of the Westchester Affordable Housing Coalition. It's part of the Neighborhood Prevention Program in New York State. I'm sorry, Neighborhood Preservation Company, a corporation in New York State. I'm a little tired. You guys go later than we do at some of our meetings. We also are members of NYSAFA, which is the New York State Affordable Housing Association. So through those memberships, through our partnerships with other groups, through a wide network of affordable housing thought leaders, we have a lot of access to some of the best practices for housing development, mitigating displacement, and preserving diversity and preserving most importantly, the socioeconomic diversity that we need. So we engage with Pattern for Progress because they're one of our resources. Pattern for Progress is a regional think tank. They're a nonprofit. They operate out of Newburgh. They specialize in planning and development and with expertise in affordable housing and economic development. So we engage them to do our strategic plan, and we also engage them to work on this very specific project to look at how we prevent displacement in the face of development and how we get to even the ability to develop opportunities for very low-income people. So we established 3 charrettes, which are basically stakeholder meetings, one with the community, one with people really who had the capacity to bring resources, funding, so nonprofit developers, state funding, private lenders, nonprofit lenders, and another follow-up stakeholder meeting with the community to talk about some of these things. And I want to introduce Joe Chaika and Eric Pearson of Pattern for Progress, because Joe's actually going to give the presentation. So.
Hi.
Good evening, Joe.
Do we want to dim the light?
Ready? Yeah, I just want to make sure you're ready.
Yeah. It is sort of late.
I guess I'll move. Yeah, I'll move.
So it is sort of late. I'm kind of tired too. We've got about an hour's drive home. So if you don't mind, I'm actually going to read from my notes because I want to make sure that I get everything out on the table and not leave anything out. And it's important that we say everything that we can possibly say. So thank you for sponsoring this project, and thanks for the opportunity to bring this to a work session. Work sessions are really important as opposed to just bringing it to a resolution and things of that nature that are a little bit more permanent. So I'd like to point out the highlights of our work here in Ossining, and I'm likely to read again from all of my notes, so just bear with me. Clearly, the village has a great concern regarding affordable housing, and you should be commended on your endeavors. Last year, the village had the wisdom to commission a housing needs assessment. It's called Housing Ossining, which provides a chronological series of recommendations along with a strategy and steps to implement those recommendations. It's also great to hear a village talking about future growth in regards to things like water treatment. Many communities that we work in, they get as far as handling what's going on in the current day. They don't necessarily have the ability to look in advance of what's going on, how the community is being built, the impact on water, sewer, bridges, things like that. So it's very nice and rewarding to hear that a community such as Ossining is taking those steps now. Our role in this project was to examine existing planning documents and reports, as Karen said, facilitate stakeholder charrettes and prepare a pathway forward. We hope that the Village Board of Trustees considers the significant and viable opportunities identified as a result of our work that builds on the strengths of the housing study that was done last year. And I believe that was conducted because of the push of IFCA and also CVH. They really wanted this study done. So it was a worthwhile investment. Overall, we heard enthusiastic response to the goal of advancing housing while simultaneously moving forward with economic development and mitigating displacement of residents and businesses. We're pleased to report there is really a lot of great excitement. I mean, these charrettes and community conversation we had were terrific. Was really good, robust conversation. But there's also great excitement from both the public and private funding sources and development sources, developers, to create partnerships and meet goals. The charrette findings underscore the value of housing in Ossining and also underscore the value of the study that had occurred last year. The key to its success, the key to the recommendations, is to conduct them in a sequential order. The study was done by a consultant who is very smart. Kevin's a really, really good, smart planner. And in order to achieve what I would consider the greatest impact on affordable housing and economic development goals, follow those things in order. It's critical. And it's a little bit of a moving target because I know that the village is so progressive and you're so on target with certain things that you've already, just in the time of this study, you've already started to advance some things, which is good. But sometimes you just have to sort of, wait a minute, let's just kind of step back and look at everything from a holistic approach. Let's see if I can operate this right. I can. So our work concentrated again on the area known as the Block. This amazing little gateway neighborhood into Ossining from the south has some really good community assets. It's culturally diverse and has great potential. However, there are some challenges. It has historically been an area of disinvestment, overcrowding, and has blighted properties. It is a neighborhood that also might be watched very closely for the potential negative impacts from luxury development. And yes, I'm speaking about gentrification. There's a possibility of that happening. Our methodology included the facilitation of 3 community stakeholder sessions. We had very good attendance and participation from local agencies, municipal representatives, the school district, financiers, and funders. The goal was to talk about weaknesses, challenges, and identify a vision for advancement. Bless you. We heard from the community leaders and the local agencies in the first session that the block had a strong sense of community. Everybody knows each other. It's kind of like Cheers. You remember the old series, Cheers? Everybody knows each other. Everybody walks in. Norm, how are you? No? Dead silence. Nothing. Okay. Then a tough crowd, tough crowd. Everybody really looks out for one another, too. Great proximity to the main street and the train, and generally, it's walkable. However, there are some challenges. As the block is generally flat, the sidewalks are in need of repair, traffic bottlenecks, and there's an affordability and overcrowding issue with some landlords not maintaining their buildings. We asked and spent time to listen to what is needed and wanted in the area. Listed on the slide, you'll see a bunch of things. It was interesting how music and arts have strong roots in this community, which can be turned into a community revitalization and economic driver for the neighborhood. Look to the north at Kingston for an example. They've got an incredible arts community there. They're taking old vacant warehouses, returning them onto the tax rolls. They're turning those spaces into maker villages, maker space, film studios, things of that nature. The second session was focused on how can it get done, resources and funding. This is when we heard from a more technical crowd. This session of professionals confirmed that the village should take their time and properly evaluate housing policy in regards to affordable set-asides and code enforcement. The conversation became a bit broader, and we heard about low foot traffic on Main Street with concerns about vacancy and economic viability of the stores. We also heard that Ossining is not an easy place to develop housing and a fear of the village missing out on opportunities if time passes by. The concept of a business incubator was supported, but it must be appropriately scaled to the community.
Can I ask you just a point of clarification? Through the 3 charrettes, was there always a delineation of where in the village, or was just Ossining or the village in general in the conversations?
The started with the block, and then it quickly went to village-wide.
The whole, okay. So it became Ossining this, Ossining not that, not this particular area. Okay.
And you'll see a little bit more in the.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's see, number 10. It's important that we recognize the participants in the second charrette, and there were funders in the room, and it's really important to understand that HCR has their eye on the community, and Go ahead.
Homes and Community
Oh, I'm
Renewal.
sorry.
So
I
that's
threw
New
an
York
acronym
State
out.
Department of Homes and Community Renewal, and that is essentially the funding entity for affordable housing.
And as a result of the sessions, HCR Homes and Community Renewal, they hooked up IFCA with a potential development partner, and it's a strong signal again that the state wants to invest in this community.
Could we just,
Sure,
could
go
I
ahead,
just want
Karen.
to interject here?
Yep.
So this is kind of significant. This funding right now is coming out of an initiative that the governor launched last year. It's a $20 billion initiative for affordable housing in New York State. So right now, we've been pretty successful in getting money from New York State. We've gotten $2.5 million from HCR over the past 3 years for renovation of existing buildings, which is great. It lowers our operating cost, and I think we may be doing solar this year. So we're doing some great things for existing buildings, but getting newer buildings in. So there's also tax credit projects which are competitive, but you can build at a much greater scale. So the developer, when we met with Conifer, what they were talking about, they're a large-scale developer that usually works with of affordable housing, that usually works with a nonprofit partner. They're interested in doing projects of anywhere from 30, which is probably the minimum they can do, to 100 units of mixed income, potentially mixed use housing, where you can get rental levels down to 30% area median income, which is considered housing for very low income people. That is almost impossible to do. We have virtually no housing that meets that requirement right now in Ossining throughout the county. So to be able to do that is a huge opportunity. So I just want to underscore that, because if we got anything out of this charrette, it's the fact that we have an opportunity to really put our money where our mouth is when we say, we want housing and we need it now, and we need it for people who live below 50% area median income. We have that opportunity.
Our third session included some participants from the first and second charrettes, but also included some new faces from working with the downtown, people working on the downtown committees. Really good stuff. We had, I don't know, probably close to 40 people in the room at that evening. The goal was twofold: speaking about housing, challenges and strategies, and bring local agencies to the same table. We discovered that strong code enforcement is needed, but there's a fear of displacement. Although many of the overcrowded homes and blighted properties are not fit for habitation, where will the people go if something should get closed up? The school is overcrowded, and how can the community deal with the impact of development? The underrepresented must be heard. They have to be given a voice. Education and communication is everything. The findings were consistent with the findings were consistent with other community feedback sessions in the past. All of those studies in the past. Everything lined up perfectly. Our participants responded very well with some ideas for opportunities and a vision. Again, work off the arts and culture to embrace the unique aspects of Ossining, increase walkability in the neighborhood. It's critical for safety, and it's also critical for the retention of the aging population and the attraction of millennials. A walkable neighborhood makes a positive impact on the economy of the village, stores, retail, cafes, offices. So, how do we connect the dots? The village has some great tools. Again, the 3 recent studies are all extremely valuable and offer great ideas and concepts for the village. There's great synergy and energy with local agencies, all wanting to make a difference and work together. As a result, the village is well positioned to advance housing, especially affordable housing. Funding sources are flush right now. The state is interested in Ossining, and there are opportunities to develop. Many of the communities that I work in, not as progressive, and affordable housing is not looked upon very favorably. Ossining has great momentum and thoughtful leaders, so I commend you on that. We cover 9 counties, by the way, so it's a big area. It's a lot of communities we examine. Solution-based approach. The next few slides offer ideas and recommendations based on existing studies and feedback from these sessions. Increasing the supply of affordable housing is imperative. However, as Karen was saying, a 10% or 20% set aside from the new developments is a slow process. If the set aside tries to reach too low of an income range, developers will just pass by the village and go on to the next community because their project just may not be economically feasible. No one will finance it if the rents are too low. Too long of an approval process and no pilots are impediments to development. Working with IFCA and having them establish a partnership with a developer to leverage state and federal funds will definitely get more income targeting housing developed more quickly. If left up to the set aside to achieve 100 units of affordable housing, even with a 20% set aside, you would need to approve and build 500 more units to reach the 100. 500 units, 20% is 100. So you'd have to build 500 to get to the 100. A partnership between IFCA and a private developer using state and federal resources has the opportunity to build 100 units in a single shot. In order to build units to serve those between 30 to 50% of area median income, public subsidy is a must. HCR funding will hit that mark. Serving 30 to 50% AMI in the open market just can't be done without deep capital subsidy. Code enforcement is critical, but must be accompanied with outreach, education, and a plan for possible relocation of tenants. Communication with the school district is also paramount. I'm sure that they want their students to do their best. Better health and education begins with housing. Housing must be addressed in tandem with economic development, which leads to the creation of a sustainable community, which includes job training, access to credit, and technical assistance for business. Before we heard, when we were talking about the water plant, we heard that there's a workforce issue. All over the Hudson Valley, in all of our 9 counties, we're hearing from municipalities that when people leave water plants, sewer plants, they retire as engineers from DPW, there's no backfill. There's not a lot of interest moving into some of those fields. So it's critical for job training. And I think you've got some really good, important opportunities here for that to happen. Housing rehab programs can also help a wide range of occupants, renters and owners, low income to moderate income. Oftentimes, grant programs serve families, individuals up to, say, 80% of area median income. Sometimes it stops at 60%. There's this sort of a weird little niche where you make too much to get a grant, but you don't make enough to go out and get a loan. And there's a lot of elderly people in that situation. A lot of people live in a house that's built before, say, 1939, or even built before 1950, where lead paint is an issue, roof is an issue, structural issues, all of those things. They make a little too much for that grant, and they don't make enough for the loan. So I think going for housing rehab is critical. It's also important that the village makes efforts to repair the existing housing stock owned by seniors, again, and working families. Establishing consistent local incentives is critical to lay the foundation for reputable developers to build here. Incentives mean everything for good developers to come through. Follow the housing needs assessment recommendations in order. I can't emphasize that enough. You've got a great study, use it. The report provides more detail on the recommendations, and I think you all received a draft copy. The slides show all of the recommendations, and I just want to highlight a few. Create a community development task force. This establishes a working body to continue these conversations and allows for communication between all the participants. Using the library as the hub, the task force can be a vital piece for the dissemination of information about village regulations, tenant rights, and other resources. Update the comp plan and then the zoning. I believe this has actually been started. Consistency for developers is everything, and a fast approval process is like gold. Code enforcement changes a community. Look at Beacon. If you walked down or drove down the streets of Beacon in 1989 through about 1994, vacant, bombed out, 58% vacancy. Where did they start? They started with strong code enforcement. Now if you look at Beacon, it's the complete opposite. I think there might be a 5% vacancy at best on their main street. Secure funds. There's a lot of money out there right now. Take advantage and use your community agencies like IFCA. Examine New York State real property tax laws as incentives to leverage investment. The report has a list of them. Read them. Take a look at them. If you don't understand them, ask me questions, but take advantage of them. Target village-owned property for the redevelopment. Create an economic strategy. This helps to set goals, objectives, and guides the process for a diverse economic base. Support your local entrepreneurs. So, in closing, overall, the village is in a very good position to advance affordable housing, even further than it has, and must be done in concert with all of the local agencies. You've got a lot of great community assets here. Establish strong communications between the governing body and the planning, zoning, and school boards. Housing is an economic development driver, and business advancement must be coordinated with the development of housing. Educate the residents and walk before you run. Again, follow the recommendations in the housing study in order. This path will provide the greatest impact and the greatest success. Stressing once again, HCR reps have been to the village. They're very supportive of looking at projects. There are dollars available at the state, and the time is right. As a result of the stakeholder engagement efforts in developing a strong relationship, there is again interest from these large-scale developers. I can't tell you enough. Both the village-owned DPW site on Water Street and Market Square on Main Street are extremely well suited for a mixed income, mixed use development. Funding that is currently available from the state likes to prioritize those kinds of projects and developments. Again, these options provide the best opportunities to develop very low and moderate income quality housing in the near term and should be prioritized based on their ability to meet the affordable housing and economic development needs of the village. Thanks for listening. Any questions?
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure my colleagues have questions and comments. Who wants to kick us off? Doesn't have to be John. No?
I'm going to listen.
Trustee Hurd.
Sure, well, first of all, IFCA, Pattern for Progress, thank you so much for allowing us to be part of an opportunity that really includes us in more of a bigger picture planning that I think is a pretty good time for us to do. We've kind of been talking about it, but more in areas that haven't really been discussed. So I grew up on the block with my dad, and it's always been safe, even if I went there at 11 o'clock at night to hang out. The gentrification issue is a major issue for me. It just, I don't know how we're going to keep saying that Ossining is for everyone when it may not be. Or I don't know what the new Ossining will be if it may not include those who are here today. So that's just my personal challenge with moving forward in a way that will rehab areas that should be rehabbed and updated. But at the expense of who? I just, and it's not towards IFCA or it's really anything in the village. I'm so happy that someone, a reputable group, two reputable groups, IFCA and Pattern for Progress, identified that our code enforcement strategy that we're actually going to start to actually enforce our code will cause displacement, and how I'm not content with the lack of planning that we have for the displacement that the village will cause due to us now finally enforcing our code. And us handing a piece of paper, which is our current policy, is totally unacceptable to me and short-sighted. So I think that, that's something that really needs to be discussed like now. I mean, I said it before, but the displacement and how we're just going to deal with that and what our role is going to be besides handing them a piece of, a piece of paper. I love the idea about us continuing to learn about state funding. I think Karen's right. There's no way to pay for the type of housing that we need to have here unless there's government money. Unless we have some, unless we're lucky that someone gives a huge donation one day, but that's pretty rare, right? So thank you for saying that, because I agree. And my only, I think, last thing is when it came to the feedback of what someone wants for the block, like, did you have like a number of residents that partook in that? Did you was it just the discernment of all these people that are in government or in housing, or I don't know?
So what we did is for the community stakeholders, it was community-based groups. So the nature of this and the way we did it, and we're not saying that we're not going to follow up. This is a starting point, and this is the beginning of an ongoing dialogue. For this particular study, we engaged community groups. So Star of Bethlehem was there, Trinity was there, Open Door was there, Neighbors Link, all the community-based groups, and then specifically groups that have a little bit more engagement in that particular area. So that's how we started the dialogue. So there was a great familiarity amongst the people in the first group with the area that we were talking about and the issues that we were talking about. And the main reason that we started this is because we really share your concern. Is that's a block that's got a historic legacy. You have families who have lived there for generations. That's when you look at families who've lived in Ossining, I'm sure if you did a study, some of the longest standing families in Ossining grew up on the block or very near to it. So it's very important to us, and that's also where our offices are, that it's preserved and maintained as affordable as possible. So to that end, we have ambitious goals of our own. So we want to continue doing the rehabilitation work that we do because we're able to do it and preserve affordability. We want to support things that preserve affordability. What we don't want to do is not address the hardest issues, because the hardest issues that we're looking at are very low income housing and displacement and housing for people who may not, for various reasons, have access to subsidies. We gotta look at that. It's not just Ossining, it's all of Westchester, and to the benefit of our own economic viability long term, because if you think you can live in a community where you don't have a workforce, you're not going to really be very happy. We need a workforce. We need people at all income levels. We need to make sure that people who worked really hard, who are now retired on fixed incomes, can age in place. So the real impetus for doing all of that is that right now things aren't really sustainable if we just let them be. So we got to take action to make sure that we do everything in our power to make sure that we have the greatest impact on providing quality, affordable housing to the people that live here, to the people who want to live here. So I think to that end, what we found that was the greatest thing, nobody said, well, we don't want that. Like, everybody said we wanted that. And to Joe's point, when we brought funders in, so it wasn't just the state, it wasn't, we had TD Bank there, their community reinvestment dollars. We have a lot of opportunities to tap into a network of funding partners. And for smaller developments, not necessarily for larger ones, we have been successful with getting money from individuals and family foundations. For Ann Street, $450,000 was given by individuals, but 2 families, or actually 3. So, I mean, we do have the ability, the same way we raise funds for other community groups, to start putting the focus on housing, because this is a community where philanthropists are very generous. They value early childhood education, they value health care. If we don't get the housing right, then those things are the next level up. Because when, you know, what we've seen is kids sleeping in bathtubs, kids in homes with mold and any number of environmental hazards that can cause long-term and permanent damage, we can do a lot better. And we have resources. We need to start having more conversations with people who don't ordinarily talk to each other, because housing's always been sort of a publicly funded thing. And there hasn't been a huge intersection until recently between housing and healthcare. Now there are models for housing, affordable housing groups to partner with community health centers, which is something we're talking about with our community health centers. So there's a lot we could be doing. So this is really just to kick it off and go out there and approach it from broadly, but then really look at the most tactical and actionable items that we can and do it, because most of them are pretty much in keeping with what we want for the comprehensive plan and what we want for the community.
And when I say that the village is well positioned, you've got an approved housing study, and having things like that, having even the comp plan, even though it's from '09, having that on record, having the study that we just did, and I would encourage a next step to adopt that as a study adopted by the village, because that gives consistency, and it gives a pathway to the funders to see that the village is looking ahead. And I can't stress that too much, because there's many communities that will put an application in with a developer for housing, and there's no plan. So when the funder looks at it as an investment, they're saying, well, what is the rest of the community doing? What is the rest of the community, how do they feel? How do they think? And they're more likely to give those dollars to a community that has these plans that are adopted. So again, positioning is everything.
Did you want to say something? So, I'm sorry. Did you?
No,
Thanks. So, thank you for the presentation, which was a synopsis. So I read it was great reading. It's about 47 or 48 pages. And let me tell you what I like about it and what I like about your presentation. First of all, it's very solution-oriented, because oftentimes what I think we get a lot of is there's all these problems, and the way to solve them is through looking backwards, like what worked in the days of when, or these are the laws from whenever. This was a very solution-driven that takes into account affordable housing, and you've got the study in here, it's embedded in here, that it's also homeowners that are very close to other dwellers, and I mean, I don't know where co-ops and condos fit in, as far as affordable housing. So depending on who you speak to in this village, affordable housing could be for renters, but also homeowners. We have a relatively large group of homeowners who fall into that category. I found that very surprising a year ago, by the way. So the similarity, I expected a difference at some level.
Your cost burden for homeowners is extremely
right. And so you've come up, what I like is that you've come up with solutions for us that are new, at least to me, may not be to others, that don't just shift the burden from one group to another, but actually talk about the state, developers that specialize in this, housing advocates that understand it more than I'm sure I do. And I really like that about reading it. Learning something new and understanding that you're trying to find other places besides the taxpayer to pay for the solution that is being discussed. I really like the charrettes. There are 3 charrettes. I know some of the people in this room that included representatives from community organizations, all of whom understand the village, right? Including TD Bank. That is, not that I'm giving them a plug, but I saw 4 people from there, so I gotta say that they were there. I think Reverend, you were in there from Star Bethlehem. There was somebody else that was on there. There was IFCA, there was town, there was village. I didn't see town. The Board of Education had, as did, right? And so the charrettes, I really like that a lot. It really says that for the past 3 months, right? It was May, June, July. You've brought together, and you included us, Karen, I think last time you came here and talked about the charrette. Huge cross-section, huge numbers of people that hit lots of the not everybody, of course, that would be impossible, but it is a significant group of the people from the community who understand it, live around it, through it, and every other way. I mean, I really appreciate that, and I know the study a year ago did that through focus groups, but I found this was sort of the next level up from that. I think taking one area, I really like that, because when you try to take a bigger area, I think it just becomes he said, she said, and opinions. And I felt that the fact that these charrettes actually were managing an area as a microcosm of bigger issues, which is why I asked the questions. It's not surprising that it ended up being Ossining rather than the section that we discussed. Karen, before I forget, so Jen is not a member of the Downtown Development Fund Council. I think she was the other group, the Downtown. She's listed in there. Yeah, I just want to remind myself to let you know that.
We will correct any of that. We got a little confused.
No. And you would not.
Straighten us out, and we'll correct
The
it.
people on the committees are confused, so you being confused is not. I have some things circled. The resource guide in the back of this, I assume this is all going to be all over the place. It is already.
Make a couple of little adjustments.
Okay, I've got to tell you, in line with what I love about this, I'm sorry?
Did you like my resource guide?
I did, and can I tell you, it is the one place, I wish I had this a year ago, you encapsulate it in short order definitions about housing and in short order about the different committees and the opportunities for resources in a language that people can understand. I assume if you put in PDF, people go on and it translates into all the languages they need so they can actually read this. And if it doesn't, we've got to figure that one out because we have a large Spanish-speaking community. This is a great document. I just wanted to go through what I like about it. I could tell you what I don't like, but actually there isn't much that I don't like about it. So I like the fact that there's open communication. The Board of Education, I spoke with the superintendent this morning. There is great concern, as you know, and many opinions both in the staff of the board, but also the board members versus staff. So I think you guys bringing everybody to the table, fantastic. And I'm so glad you've incorporated the other pieces. I thank you for the synopsis of the recommendations from the different folks that were on there. And going back to our study, we get a lot of complaints that we pay for studies and we don't use it. So here you're actually using both a committee that was placed together by this board. Were you on the board when we set up? No, last year, excuse me, by the committee of people in our community. You took what they came up with. You may agree with it, you may disagree with it, but you included it, you played off of it, and I think that's great. I also think it's great that you took Kevin Dwarka's study that the village did pay for, I think $50,000, and I think that's what you wrote in. You talked about it, and you're using it, and you use the 3 charrettes. Not you. When I say you, I don't mean to imply that either of you. That all of these people together made an agreement, or else I don't think it would be on your synopsis, on your own, about things that are important, whether it's the chronology of that study and how to go through those steps. If I see one more mention that we've got to go redo the comprehensive plan, I think Quantel has said that when I started my first term, something. I've spoken to a couple of people about this, that this is the time we have to really redo the comprehensive plan. I do thank you for putting things in perspective, because for me, let's just say that I didn't realize how important the comprehensive plan was when I became a trustee. I certainly never heard of it when I was a citizen commuting 12 hours a day. So I never knew what it was. It's only when I became a trustee that I was told that's the first thing you should read. Actually, Quantel's the one that told me that. And then I did start reading it. It's a lot. And now I see the importance of it, and today I see even more, because you're bringing it to light that with all the places that you work, even having it is how one gets funding I mean, there's a real practical piece to it. This is not just a nice thing to have. And the zoning, the issue of housing and displacement of people weighed against code enforcement, I think, comes up a couple of times. I don't think there's a great solution for it. There are people sleeping on floors. Arguably 10 men on a mattress on some basement are already homeless, but they have a roof over their head. But that's like saying that being on top of a keg of dynamite is better than nothing. On one hand. On the other hand, I honestly don't think the county or this country has a great solution across all the major urban areas in the United States.
I think there might be, and I'd like
Do.
to, I'd like to offer to come back,
Right.
do a little bit more research and get some best practices.
Happy to
and-
hear
And
it.
at least suggest 3 or 4 examples. Implementation of that, of taking care of that displacement, that's the really difficult part, because who pays for it?
Right.
And so maybe there's some foundations, maybe there's some grants, maybe there's some philanthropic local families that could cover those expenses.
And that's what I actually meant. It's not that I think there are no solutions, having read about it in a number of, I mean, there are 11 major demographic areas in the United States, right? Washington, D.C. probably has one of the worst issues going on. L.A. is in a bad state. Detroit's in a bad state. Not seeing great solutions there, but taxpayers who are paying property taxes, who are already, by your own studies and other studies, who are already considered to be living in somewhat close to unaffordable housing for themselves, then having more taxation put on them is a real concern for me as a representative of the entire community. It's who pays for everything. I love the idea that at least you're coming up with other things and are so optimistic that there are other ways to reach a good end. So I just wanted to point out some of the things that I really like about it. If I read it more, I might find things that I really don't like about it. I'm sure I can call you or email you. It's not a problem, but it's rare for me actually to see a study and not have. So thank you for bringing it to our attention and to my attention anyway. I appreciate the knowledge.
Just 2 quick responses. You use the term report on a shelf. We have a board, our board, Patterns Board, is 42 members. It's a regional board. We're mission driven to the point where they do not want us to do a report that sits on a shelf. Even if we have to go back at our expense to make sure something happens, we do that. So I really appreciate you recognizing that. And the second point is the Community Development Task Force. I think it's very critical to set that up so these conversations continue. And you have this amazing library across the street. I think it would be a fantastic hub of information and communication flow. So,
Thank you.
So Joe, I want to thank you for coming here. I've followed Pattern for Progress for quite some time, particularly your paper on gentrification and beyond. Right, you clearly lay out some pros and cons to revitalization, and I want to start with particularly the homeowners. Right, you laid out. Pretty much, Ossining is very much balanced, slightly more renters than owners. But then the number that was striking was the amount of homeowners that are actually between 50 and below 30% of the area median income. Those homeowners are truly, they're mortgage burdened, right? And so with you highlighting that information, for me, as we start talking about the Broad Avenue corridor, it's not only enough to talk about affordable housing, but when you do have a Hudson Step, you could possibly displace homeowners, right? Because the truth is that, just according to what you wrote, and Beyond Gentrification, is that as communities are thriving and there's more investment, that means property values rise and that means taxes rise. So your work has influenced me to know that revitalization, everyone doesn't benefit, right? And so then that gets me to start thinking about where in Ossining do we have the low home values, right? Versus, so Indian Village, there may be an average of 400,000 versus the Broad Avenue corridor where the average may be 275. So when we have Hudson Step coming in, not only is it going to increase the rents for the actual people who have to rent, but it's also going to increase the taxes. And that is a solution that we haven't actually thought about. I do know communities like Charleston, South Carolina, they have a program to kind of mitigate those things. But when we're talking about homeowners, I think it's just looking at the data. It's important to kind of segment homeowners, right? Because they're, according to this, at least 2/3 of homeowners here in Austin are actually fine. But there's a third that are definitely cost burden and severely cost burden. But then the renter side is actually the opposite. 2/3 of renters are not fine, and a third are actually find affordable housing. Looking at, I will say that knowing the work that you do, I was kind of, you had charrettes, and there are people, groups of people saying, there's a permitting processing, and we kind of we want more of business incubators, but one of the things that you have done in other communities is really outline some of the challenges. So, for example, Newburgh has 700 vacancies at one time, right? So when we talk about adapt reuse, that is something that you can do for Newburgh versus a Nyack, right, that may not have had major foreclosures. Ossining, we've had some challenges, and we have some vacant storefronts, and we've had some foreclosed homes, but we're slightly different than Peekskill, right? That when the housing crisis happened, they had a lot more foreclosures. And I kind of was like, where is our profile? Because even when you talk about growth, right? I like the way, again, in some of your other work, you talk about growth and what growth looks like. And when we talk about gentrification, it's all about growth and who we're inviting in. There are some communities who can absorb growth, right? And there are others who cannot, right? There are some communities that are declining, and there are some others that are not. So Ossining has an increased school population, right? But then, oftentimes when developers come here, they use the Rutgers numbers, and they say, hey, we don't, not too many kids are going. But then at the same time, again, we have an older homeowner population. They sell their home, then we get the influx of New York City, and then we have all these children. So I'm just kind of trying to figure out, in your conversations, did you provide people with that kind of data, or was it more of these are some of the issues that we see?
If you go on to our website, take a look at our community profile, the Village of Ossining. We've done a community profile which studies the demographics, and in about a month's time, we're also going to release a housing profile for all of our what we call our urban action agenda communities. There's 25 of them. Ossining is one of them. We just added that last year. Okay. Thanks to the mayor. Thank you. And so we can definitely take a look into those things. And I appreciate you bringing up the gentrification paper that we did. I think we put in there maybe 10 or 12 different mitigating ways that you can deal with gentrification and displacement. But it reminded me actually of the housing forum that we did in Beacon at the firehouse, down in the basement of the firehouse. We had the Bronx Borough President, Ruben Diaz, come up. And he said something that was really very, very striking. He indicated that in a community that is revitalizing and rebuilding itself, putting in parks, putting in new sports facilities, new sidewalks, new buildings, it's all of that is being built for the people that are there now. They have to use it. So it's not just being built for the people that are moving in. So when he said that, everybody's jaw kind of dropped, and it was kind of an aha moment. So I appreciate you bringing that other paper up. Thank you.
I just want to be clear about something, because your numbers, so page 28, I just want to be clear about the public discussion.
You might.
Sorry, Tom. So I just want to be clear about the numbers, and you can tell me where you get yours, but on page 28, on the renters and owners piece, you use a third and 2/3. I just want to be a little bit clearer, unless you're getting it somewhere else. It's 56.3% renters, 42.1%. The title here is Living in Severely Cost Burden and Unaffordable Housing. It's not quite 2/3, 1/3. I just want to be clear.
Looking at page 29.
Okay.
When we
I want to get our numbers right, because they
Yeah.
went to a lot of trouble to get this right.
Yeah.
So where is 2/3, 1/3?
So right, so like if you look at your renters only, right, and you see like your affordable, right? It's these are, you have 1836.
Yeah, but you're okay,
So-
but you're
so-
you're really getting into, I mean, the general number that they
Yeah, no,
use
I was
is-
talking
You're
about-
looking at a line
Yeah,
item.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's.
I'm looking at the calc.
I think you and I can agree that these are not great numbers on any level, but it's not quite 2/3, 1/3 in the community. It's owners and renters are closer to each other as far as affordability and unaffordability than one would think. It is not so disparate as a 2/3 and 1/3. It's actually a little bit closer than that. There might be at
So
certain
if-
places and at certain economic levels.
So again, when we're talking,
greater disparity.
I'm sorry, but when we're talking about, my 2/3, 1/3, if you look at page 29
Right,
and the actual
looking at it.
affordable, 2,095, and again, 3620. So, roughly 735 and 790 are the ones that are unaffordable and severe. Combine those numbers versus your 2095. That's the one I was particularly talking about.
If it might be
okay.
an easier read actually, and these charts, they're really hard to show graphically because it's a lot of numbers.
Right.
But if you actually look at page 28, towards the top of the page, where
Okay.
you'll see on the left-hand side it says renters.
Mm-hmm.
Slide your finger to as a percentage of total number all the way over to severe.
Mm-hmm.
1/3 of the renters are severely cost burdened.
Okay.
Slide your finger down and you'll see that owners, about 22% are severely cost burdened.
Okay.
When
So,
you
yeah.
add the unaffordable column and the severely cost burdened column together, over 50% of your renters pay
Right.
more than 30%, and about 42% of the owners pay.
So I just said, okay. It's
A lot of
It's not
numbers.
as severe. I'm not happy about it, but it's.
So, my other question is now with all these solutions, like what is the end goal with respects to Broad Avenue, right? Like there's, are we talking like what do you want the village to do? Would you like the village to eminent domain the old A&P area and that whole area and say, hey, you know what, we're going to use some? I'm dead
A&P?
serious and.
Wow.
No, I know.
and then have state funding to come and do some mixed income housing. Like what is the ask?
Well, I'm so glad that you asked that, Trustee Bazemore, because there's a lot of things that we want to ask, but we also want to partner with you and work to make it better. So there are some issues there. So, I always get concerned when we talk about revitalization being a bad thing, because while I understand the implications, like when you make things better, things become more valuable. But then again, if you don't make things better, it's not good either. So, we have to find a way to really support people whose tax burden may go up so they don't end up, they'll sell their house at a higher price, which is good, but if they don't have anywhere else to go, not so good. So we got to look at those things. I wish I had all the answers to those type of problems, but when we talk about Broad Avenue, right now there's a couple of things going on there. So you have the Ossining Children's Center moving into that neighborhood. There's a lot more activity there than there has been in the 4 years that I've been at IFCA and in the 20 some odd years that I've been involved with that organization. So because you have more people there, things are sort of like, well, why is this going on? So you have some issues where things aren't being maintained as well as they could be. Because it's a very trafficked area, but we have an issue on some of the streets. The sidewalks aren't really that safe. So the village is working on this. I know they've applied for grants and things. So this isn't to complain, but we can do better in that neighborhood. People have been putting up with a lot of stuff that they shouldn't really have to put up with. With Hudson Step and other things. I think overall we've had vacant shops and buildings, and there's one on State Street and one on the corner of Broad Avenue that have been vacant for a really, really long time. People could be using those shops, but I don't, I know in some places that there are municipal policies to say, you know, if you're going to leave this vacant for so long, there's going to be a consequence to that. Because, you know, you can say you want $33 a square foot or whatever they're charging. If you can't get it, you can't get it. And it becomes a blight on the neighborhood. So those are barriers when you get down to Broad Avenue. There's barriers in, you know, enforcing, you know, we have some buildings that have been condemned down on around the corner. We have some other things. So while the code enforcement's great, I think we need to work and access some of the funding that can help some of the homeowners who are living in their buildings, because I think some of them really don't have the money to fix them. For people who do, we have to look at other things. But I think we have to look at Broad Avenue the same way we look at every other place. And Broad Avenue is such a viable street for commerce, for activity, for community events. You got this beautiful, lovely, broad, literally a broad avenue with great walkability, and not a lot going on down there. So we can do more there. And I think that whatever we can do through grant funding, through at least, you know, I don't want to bring up eminent domain. That's a little bit, you guys can discuss that. But I think we do need to work with local businesses there who maybe could be doing more with their businesses. And we don't know, like maybe there's an interest in, you know, maybe those owners do have an interest of doing more. Maybe we just have to have some conversations. So we're trying to do that right now. But anything we want to do in conjunction with the village, with the comprehensive plan. And we want to make sure, you know, part of it too is like Broad Avenue, you're seeing development on Spring Street. Main Street, we've seen more development recently than we have in decades. You got some activity on State Street. And you just finish around Broad Avenue and you have this wonderful, you know, really like access to Main Street, because you really extend that economic viability opportunity. So there is interest. We have to explore it more. I think we have to explore it to see, do people, you know, the developers that come in will buy property. So do people who have buildings there or sites that are big enough to do some of these state projects, do they want to sell? And if they do, what's their price? Because we can start negotiating that. And I think the village can help with that. I think we need to do that together.
And part of that assistance from the village, again, are incentives, are incentives and an approval process that goes very quickly and smoothly for developers. I know it's a lot bigger city, but take a look at what New Rochelle is doing. They've got a 90-day approval process. I'm not suggesting this is going to become a New Rochelle. But what I'm suggesting is if there's an approval process that's in place with certain incentive packages identified, developers will look at this and they'll want to do business here. I was going to say something else, but I lost it.
John, did you want to comment? You were holding off.
One of the areas that I was looking at was Section 8, the New York State real property tax laws. And obviously there's a number of different things that you highlight here. Maybe you could sort of give me some examples of that and sort of how that works functionally. You know, one of the problems that we have here in the village with respect to property taxes is that, you know, north of 60% of property taxes, you know, are picked up by the school system. And because we've been robbed of our foundation aid for a decade, you know, we've had a lot of problems here with regards to that. And, you know, one of the reasons that the notion of a pilot's come through is because, you know, I mean, it's not our fault. I mean, we're a victim of circumstance because we have a school system that's continued to grow for a decade. And so the whole issue of you know, giving a developer, you know, some kind of a break, it's not just our money, it's not just the village money, it's the largest burden is carried by the school tax. So so for me, I'm sort of looking, you know, I had a chance to look through some of this. It looks interesting. It looks like a lot of these programs are where you sort of flatten the tax out for some period of time, and then the increases come in later on. And
Phased in over time.
yeah, they're phased in over time. So it's not like, I mean, is it a pilot? I don't know. It kind of sounds like that. You know, in other words, somebody's property wouldn't increase at the same rate as others of the same ilk.
It's a form of a pilot.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I've never seen these different things before. So I found that, you know, very, very interesting as kind of another way to create incentive, because obviously we need to do that.
Let me answer your question as far as New York State real property tax law and how it relates to the school tax portion. I want to do a little bit more research to give you good information about that, because there's an important tie-in there, and each community does it a little bit different. Some opt out, some opt in, and I want to understand the mechanics so I can explain it more thoroughly.
Yeah, I mean, we've had those kinds of conversations with the school district with regards to all kinds of things that have to do with municipal property that's owned by the town, and, you know, all these, you know, this whole other mess that we have that's municipal government here in the state of New York. It's the most convoluted thing on the planet. You know, there are more taxing districts than you can possibly believe, you know, and
147 levels of government in in 7 counties.
yeah, so it's bizarre, and you wonder why people, you know, their eyes roll back in their head and spin around. So, you know, I'm interested in that, though. I found that fascinating, and if you can provide more guidance, more ideas around that, I'd be interested to hear about it. So,
I can probably dig up some sample resolutions and things of that nature for you.
I mean, I would echo you know, a lot of the comments of my colleagues. You know, I appreciate the study. I appreciate all the work that you did, and thank you for your efforts.
You need to say something else?
Yeah. So I definitely want to thank you for.
Just 1 second, because we've twice cut Karen off,
Okay.
and she was
Oh,
about to comment for her.
I was just going to wrap up, but I'm not going to wrap up.
All right.
Just to let you talk.
Listen.
I haven't even commented yet.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry.
Plenty
I'm
more
sorry.
fun ahead.
Grab
of
a
us.
seat.
All right. So I definitely appreciate the idea of using village-owned property as some of the greatest opportunities for affordability. My question is, when you were doing the charrettes, how did you choose what you were looking at as far as like what people were given? It's like you were looking at the housing policy, so and the FAQ. There was a great portion of this report that actually talked about rent stabilization, and so I'm curious. I'm curious because ideally we know that, or maybe I'm asking your personal opinion. I know a lot of the work that you do, you work up in the Hudson Valley. They don't have programs like that. Not outside of Westchester. So I guess my question is if we know that we cannot preserve, there's not enough subsidies to cover. I didn't know like what was the purpose of mentioning in the actual report. Like, wow, that seemed like there was a lengthy cover.
Joe, could you talk to the mic?
Okay.
It's part of the Ossining Housing Study.
Okay.
And it was the eighth it was the eighth policy to implement.
Okay.
So I did not want to leave that out, because otherwise it would have been only the first 7, and then you leave off the last step. And that last step is further analysis. So it's really important to read through that technical paper number 4, which gives us a very detailed step analysis and action steps to study how ETPA should be examined.
Okay.
It's not an easy process, and it shouldn't be done quickly. You have to go through in critical analysis for that. That's my only remark. On that.
Okay.
Or if that answers your question.
Yeah, it would be a more offline conversation, because it would really strike a stronger conversation. So I will say that again, given the work that I've seen you do in other communities, I'm waiting to see, Ossinings's profile, right? Because this talks about more commercial real estate. There's a conversation about mom and pop stores, but again, if we are, increasing investment, then I'm trying to figure out how does the business incubator and the commercial real estate actually tie in with each other. Because again, we can't, one thing that we as government try to do is we're trying to mitigate market forces. And when when government is not intervening and it's left up to the market, then you start to get what people call gentrification.
What you're describing there is really an economic development strategy.
Okay.
When you want to examine the existing businesses, who are they? What are they? What is their business? What is their customer base? Are they storefronts with a back-end online presence? What's going on within that business? Where do their dollars come in? How do they come in? And also with the business incubator, again, we made we referenced the term in here, scalable to the community. So, the best not business incubator, but a really good model is this what's called WeWork. I don't know if anybody. It's a shared working model. New York City, it's in really big metro areas. So if you took that model and scaled it down and put that into an Ossining, I think that would help bring some office type, professional type people, some creative type people in graphic arts, people, architects, engineers, into a shared working space where rents are lower, people can afford to have an office there, and there's this whole collaborative type of environment, which is really critical in the way that we work today. I mean, I'm 52. I'm considered a dinosaur the way I work. I still use little calculators and tape ad machines and things like that. But today's creative class, the millennials, they're on their phones, they're doing things quickly like this and like this. And it's a new model. It's a different way of approaching work. And I think that really needs to be embraced in the new economy. If you want to have your Main Street kind of like the old Main Street, the portion of it can possibly work, but you have to have a lot of foot traffic for that. How do you get foot traffic in here? Where do you put the cars? Things of that nature. So all of that has to be examined. So the community profile, the housing profile, I think will help answer some of your questions, but to fully answer your economic questions, I think an economic development strategy needs to be put into place.
And just my last comment. This is again, there's some portions of this that I would, offline definitely
I'm happy to
have longer conversations with. But ultimately, I think it's always important that when we're talking about the block or in the community, I'm just looking at the people who were actually invited. Most of those people are not from the block. I would even say that I would go one by one and say, have you ever walked down? I mean, do you know the people who live there? Do you know the people who live around there? I'm a little apprehensive about outsiders making comments on what should happen with the block. I think when we're talking about these larger issues of gentrification and just the way that we develop overall, is that there have been decisions that people have made and community members have made about the community that have not taken into consideration the needs of those surrounding communities. So when we're talking about the DPW site, when we're talking about Harbor Square, when we're talking about Hudson Steps, when we're talking about the We Can Do It lot, we have built housing in areas that have been predominantly occupied by people of color. And the housing that has been built has not actually been affordable for the people who are there. So again, looking at all these ideas about the artists, listen, communities all over the country invite artists into their community, and then when they are done with them, they are done with them, and they're out. So I just...
Really? Detroit is a great example of exactly the opposite. of that.
Detroit, okay, again, I don't know exactly how you see Detroit. My understanding is there's been large land speculations. People from like New York have gone up there. They have bought homes and they have remodeled them and they're actually up. So there's a lot of people in Detroit who've actually been displaced. Again, I don't know your frame of reference, but this is not new. Like the Ossining is no different from many other communities. We see this over and over again. So I think that's my final comment, is that people are making decisions, and I'm just trying to figure out where was the participants. I mean, it's good to have, stakeholders. It's good to have the people who the healthcare workers. It's good to have the good Rev, and all these people, but I'm looking at, again, some of the things that even the participants, there's certain things I agree with. More youth program, all those things, but I always feel like we're always going to have this moment of contention when it comes to economic development in this community, is because people are making decisions for other people's community. And we can say that we are one community, but the bottom line, the truth is there's always been a dividing line here in Westchester. People say they have moved here to this community for its diversity, but yet and still, when I look at who lives in certain communities, people have made certain choices. Yeah.
So I really want to answer that, because this was a criticism. It was a criticism of the housing needs study that was done, and it's something. So I want to explain. This was a first step. We specifically did not invite individuals at this particular time because we had a very limited budget. We had to get a lot of information, and it's not an easy thing to do. So there are no decisions being made. Like, I just want to be real clear, and we know that pretty much everybody says, let's build artist housing or let's do artisan stuff. That's a knee-jerk reaction that we get all the time. Whether or not it's right or viable, we really have to explore that. We took care when we developed the list, and not everybody, again, keep in mind that there were people that probably had a good sense that were invited from organizations that are around there that either couldn't make it or didn't respond or didn't come. So we did do more outreach than is evidenced by who showed up. The idea was just to start a conversation. One of the things that we want to do next, and we're actually doing this for another issue that has to do with the children's center development, is getting more individuals from the community, people who actually live on the block, people who may be homeowners or business owners, things like that. So that is something that we are conscious of and that we are planning to do. This is a long, hopefully not too long, but this is this was just a point in time to start. So I hear you, and I think that across the board, getting into, we have the issue when we do these things, and we all know it. We all know who shows up. It's the people who represent community, work in the community and everything. When you go to individuals to try to get them in, they're busy, they have other things. We got to do a better job of that. So that's one thing that we plan to do, a lot more outreach and a lot more things on a lot of different issues, just to get people more engaged in how they can have control in their communities, how they can make a difference. Because what I hear the most on the block is my voice doesn't matter. So even when you invite people to do things where you want their voice to resonate, they may not come because they're not convinced that if they come, it's going to make a difference, and they're busy and they have a lot of things to do, or whatever reason. We got to do a better job of how to outreach, because all of us that show up at everything don't have that reach necessarily, and we have to do better. So I completely understand what you're saying, but anything that's said about, what type of businesses and everything, no decisions are made on that. I think if we get to the point, and I would like to get to this point, where we can start looking at sites and talking about what we can do, whether it's on Broad Avenue or in the nearby community, then we really have to start drilling down and making sure that we're recognizing people's real concern. Because right now you don't have a lot of people talking about even the development that's going on State Street. You don't have the number of people coming from the block to your meetings that the town has for people coming for Stony Lodge. So we got to get everybody out because there's implications when we do things and people have to understand what's going on. So I agree with you, and we want to work with the village to make sure that we can get people who feel that their voices don't matter to understand that they do.
You need to say something else, Trustee?
I just wanted to thank you. I think you articulated that in a way that if I can't speak for people that would come from the block or the surrounding neighborhood would say or are scared to say or don't want to say or just don't say. And, you know, I just thank you because now we have an advisory opinion that we could look as to how we want to proceed as a village, what we want to do on our own, what we want to take from the study, what we don't want to take from the study, what we want to adopt, what we don't want to adopt, what we agree with, what we don't agree with. I think you provided a good platform and model to use because you kind of used all our studies that we have, which most people don't do. I mean, clearly the majority of the board differs on ETPA and it being in order and how it's a policy that could potentially help the majority amount of people due to urgency. Which is why we have been moving completely forward with the entire process on how that is done. But besides that, I just want to thank you.
I'm very pleased to hear so many folks talk about opening the comp plan. I think the time is now that we do absolutely need to open up the comp plan, and that needs to be a community-wide initiative involving residents, involving the volunteer members of our boards and committees, and obviously our partners in the schools and the town, and learning from experts in our community and in our region. So thank you so much for reminding us and driving home that point. It was obviously part of the housing needs assessment. You also made reference to the very first item on our housing needs assessment, which is to clearly establish what is our economic development strategy in response to one of the questions from Trustee Bazemore. So I will also say I'd like to everybody at home can't necessarily see everyone in the room. I'd like to mention that our new village planner, Tracy Corbett, is with us here this evening. We are delighted to have her on board. She'll be integral in moving forward with everything that we're talking about here tonight, everything that's been touched on in this report and all of the housing reports that you've mentioned. Tracy, I know you're just observing tonight. Is there anything that you want to chime in, or we'll talk later? Great. I'd like to, I just want to highlight something that you touched on, which was the New Rochelle approach. And I've been hearing about it for years, and it didn't really resonate with me what the value of that fully was until you were there. You were there when we were at the Affordable Housing Summit, and one of the speakers was the guy from who manages that program for New Rochelle. Yes, Luis. And I got to fully understand, and then I called Noam Bramson, the mayor, to understand how did you guys go through this process? And they're a much bigger community than we are, and they used resources differently. They brought in a master developer to organize their plan, and their goals are certainly different than ours would be. But the process of doing an incredible amount of work up front with creating the structure in the district that they were looking at, for us, the block would be part of the area that would make sense to consider with the downtown and waterfront is really where we have the most opportunity for this kind of development. It finally resonated with me how incredibly valuable that is, because up front you do a generic environmental impact statement, you do form-based codes, and all of that is designing the vision of what your community wants to be going forward, and then clearly presenting that to anybody who wants to consider investing in our community. And we make such a clear pathway for folks that they show up with a plan that is going to be able to go through the planning process in 60 to 90 days, and that's just unheard of. And then all that money and all that time doesn't have to be spent in going through what we see happening with our planning process, but it takes an incredible investment up front to be able to put that in place. And I'm now in my 6th year in local government, and so it really took me 5.5 years to totally wrap my head around that, and New Rochelle has had it in place now for a couple of years, so they have a track record to learn from. It's actually a component of the DRI application that we submitted this summer. We still don't know what's going on with that, but because it's not an inexpensive undertaking, and it's not a simple thing. But just opening up the comp plan and going through that process, that's something that would take a year. Just an ordinary comp plan update would take a year. I think a couple of us mentioned just how excited we are about some of these opportunities that HCR directed somebody or recommended somebody to come down here, and that there's interest from really high quality developers who have an incredible amount of expertise in doing mixed use, mixed income development, and we have village-owned properties that allow us to have so much leverage in putting together these kind of developments that could serve our community really, really well. And right now, there's the state funding that exists right now and may not exist 2 years from now. So can you describe for us what that process looks like? If we're opening up a comp plan at the same time that we're talking to these potential developers, you know, the cart before the horse, like, well, what is the sequence of events and how can all of that work from a planning perspective? And Tracy's just going to listen right now, please. She doesn't have to just listen if she wants to chime in.
I would defer to the planning experts. I'm not a planner by trade.
Okay.
So when talking about comp plans and zoning updates, I'm not the specific, we don't do comp plans. They're legally binding documents that have a lot of teeth, and it sets the path for a community for a long time. If it's not done absolutely perfectly, there's a lot of issues. So as much as I have some anecdotal history and information about it, I would absolutely want to defer to a planner about that.
But to that end, the fact that you're opening up the comprehensive plan and updating it doesn't mean that those conversations have to stop, because the way that the tax credit programs work is they're competitive. So, and there's a bidding cycle for the 9% tax credit. So, and that doesn't kick in until December, right?
Yeah, there's a couple. I can talk to the funding piece if you'd like.
So my point is that we can pursue, because nothing, you know, we're talking about government funded projects. It's like nothing, you know, is going to move with alacrity. So we have a window, but it's, you know, we have a little while. We can continue having discussions, and one of the suggestions that we have talked about is getting Conifer and maybe Darren Scott here and having a meeting with village manager and planner and maybe representatives of the village board to sort of talk about, you know, because here's the thing, we need a site too. So to talk about what's available, we're also doing sort of an inventory of potential sites that may also be owned by other people that maybe could be available or purchased. So we're looking at a whole range of things and narrowing that down, and then we can talk about the process, because if you decide to do something, it's likely will be with an RFP anyway. So what does that look like? It's going to take time to get a concept together. So there's no reason why people can't be working towards that during the time that you're reviewing the comprehensive plan. I mean, that can happen somewhat simultaneously so that you don't lose, you don't wait a year, then start again. So, I mean, Tracy, you can tell me if I'm really off base, but some of it. Yeah, so we can if we have conversations, I think we can make sure that we mitigate any wasted time, but maximize the ability to make sure that the comprehensive plan is taken into account, that whatever you do fits into that plan.
Yeah, I think the comprehensive plan, I think we should talk about the comprehensive plan update, and I do know a lot about the New Rochelle plan, have pretty good working knowledge of what they've done and how they did it, and I think that at this hour, that's a conversation for another day.
So, yeah, please.
Let's assume it's September 2018 right now. It's a couple days away, right? The next, what's called the early round of funding applications due to the state for tax credits, is October of 2019. That gives you essentially a year to get an application ready. Within that, the process, to answer your question about process, so you want to examine sites, you want to take a look at your development team, you want to get an option, you want to put together a market study, and you want to apply for the funding. The other critical, important, very important part about putting in applications now for tax credits is the tax credit it works off of the federal government. It works off of allocations from the feds to the state. Those allocations can very easily change as tax code changes. Those dollars, those tax credits are extremely competitive. The way that the national organization that we live in works right now, you might want to jump on that because we don't know what's going to happen with tax credits. We don't know what's going to happen with the federal budget on funding for things like community development block grant and home programs. Those are two other extremely important funding sources that leverage tax credits. I can talk about capital stack all day, but I'll stop.
But there is a lot we don't know that's going on at certain levels of government, so.
I hope that helps answer some of your questions.
It does, and I'm thinking, I know September 12th, we have a number of things already on the agenda, but one of the items we're already going to be inviting Tracy to talk about is a particular strategy regarding land use, so let's broaden that conversation to pick up on a lot of what we've talked about tonight, if we could, Tracy, and then you'll be, all ready to help guide us through this conversation then. My question, my last question, I think we'll all be happy to adjourn to exec. Those of us who, oh God, we still have one more item. Oh, okay. My last question is, when you talk about adopting the plan, and everybody's not going to love everything in the plan, and everybody didn't love everything in the housing needs assessment, so adopting the plan, just to clarify what that means for the village, if we formally adopt it or if we just add it to our list of resources. I'm looking at you, Debbie. Tell me what you think makes sense.
I would say that we add it to our list of resources that we have, but I would really need to talk to Joe later about what the adoption
process
means to us.
I did a housing study in the city of Hudson, and the city adopted the plan. A little bit different study, but we can talk more about it.
Did you want to comment on the adoption process?
So, kind of. Because, especially what Karen just said, that it's such a first phase learning how we're doing stuff, and then Trustee Bazemore's main point that we didn't actually reach out to the stakeholders, and then at least practicing what I preach about involving actual residents from the very beginning, not when a project's already in mind for them or around them. I have no intention of adopting this, but as a resource to help us plan together on how to, if we're going to do another report or charrette or whatever, that we do it in a way that includes residents. But I don't, I have no intention of wanting to adopt this into actual policy. I like Village Manager McDonald's suggestion of adding it as a resource. Especially because we don't even agree on the end advisory opinions about ETPA, right? The majority of the board. I'm not going to adopt something that we don't agree on, at least the majority of the board. And how was so a resource is definitely I feel the best way to just keep it as a resource.
But adopting this as a resource is a step one. Resolution, I think, could be drafted that way.
Well, I wouldn't want to. I don't want to formalize it. I just want to say, we have it for future planning, and we work with IFCA every day, so we could always,
Yeah, and I just want to say that the first recommendation is to create a community development task force, which would essentially do exactly what you just said. So that actually is a recommendation in the proposal. So. Yeah, whether how you want to adopt it, it's but that is the first step of the you know, the
That's your
recommendation.
first step. We don't know if that's our first step yet, so that's what I'm
Well,
saying.
that's the first step of what was presented tonight, whether.
Right, no, but which is why we can't just agree on it on one meeting to adopt it. We would have to see if that's also a first step that the board as a whole feels that should be our first step as a village, and if it involves an outside partner and why.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sure this isn't going to be the last conversation. It's just
All
the
right,
last
well, thank you
conversation
so
we can
much.
probably get through tonight. It's 11 o'clock, and I know now that I'm being reminded, we're not even done. Thank you very much.
The last item on our agenda is a discussion about community choice aggregation. This is a program that we have been in for several years. The contract is up, and we wanted to see if the board was interested in continuing that contract. Stuart has some information. They did send us what our community has saved by being a partner in this program, and then answer any questions.
I think we can do this really quickly.
Right, real quick.
This is the,
Whoa.
there was an MOU that was signed, I don't even need it, unless we have to do it. The MOU was signed a couple of years ago with Sustainable Westchester. It is due to expire at the end of December, so we are due to sign a new MOU. They would like to have it done by the end of August, early September, because that's when they will be going out for bid with other municipalities. I've advised them that if this board is amenable, we would have a resolution on the 5th of September, and they are okay with that. The MOU is virtually identical to the MOU that was approved a few years ago. The ESA, the Electric Service Agreement, is basically the same agreement that was signed 3 years ago. It's just to essentially keep us within the program. They would like us to keep with the energy saving part of the program, which is where there was some money saved. I did send along to you earlier this week some of the calculations that they provided with regard to the various savings that were in the village, but this is essentially a continuation of the agreement that is going on now, and it would just allow, the authorization would allow the village manager to sign the MOU, and then when the agreement is actually entered into, to sign the agreement. We do have the draft agreement, which would be annexed to the MOU, but this just allows them to go the next step. They're gathering this from all the different municipalities so that they can then go out into the market and basically negotiate for the best electric utility rates.
Any questions?
Nope. Nope.
So we'll have a resolution to authorize signing of the MOU
On September 5th.
5th. Terrific.
I like them.
Yeah, well done, sir. All right, so we need a motion to go into executive session for matters of personnel and collective bargaining.
Yes.
I also have a brief matter on legal, but I'd like everyone to be in here for that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Next week, August 29th, special time, special location, focused on one topic. 7 p.m. at the community center. We will be hearing from the consultants who undertook the vacancy study, and we will have a representative from HCR, from the New York State agency that handles ETPA, at that meeting. If you have any questions or concerns, things you want us to try and have addressed during the presentation, please send us an email this week to bot@villageofossining.org and dmcdonnell@villageofossining.org, and we will share those questions with the consultants or with the representative from HCR so that they can be as prepared as possible to make this as valuable a presentation as possible. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned to executive session.